Test, test, test. 1, 2. We don't have volume. Test, test, test. 1, 2.
Audio out of that.
It's on.
Test, test. 1, 2.
Then you'll be here if you do want to use the podium. You're free to use the podium. But if you go to the restroom, put it off.
Lots of places. Yeah, no, I'll be handing this back as soon as
So that'll be
Is Marquis here? Marquis?
just kind of walk one from sides, all right?
All right. So wait, is there a particular order? No, you guys said they wanted me to sit here because I think you guys I was told to sit on there.
Are you mic'd?
I am, but I'm not turned on.
All right.
We have some things to do.
Oh my goodness, yeah, it's amazing.
Good morning, everyone. Did everyone enjoy dinner last night? For those that missed it, you missed something really big. So we're just a little bit behind schedule. We had a wonderful interfaith prayer. If you weren't able to join us, you were prayed for. I can guarantee you that. So on this very first panel, we're going to kick it off with the business case for faith-oriented ERGs. Sumreen Ahmad is leading it from Accenture. She and I have worked together on a number of projects. She's a real leader in this space. And we've got people, they'll each introduce themselves. You can see them on the program. But just a wealth of knowledge here. Sumreen.
Thank you, Brian. And just start everything in God's name and in gratitude. So I do want to express my gratitude to Brian and anyone who's been involved in pulling this together. For someone, I think for all of us who've been doing this work for so long, this is amazing to feel like what I hope is not the tipping point. I think there's still so much work to be done, and I think for everyone in the room, thank you for being a part of it. It really is a privilege. So as Brian said, I would love for the panel to just briefly, we're going to spend just a few minutes. I have the privilege of being able to keep what could be a 3-day conversation down to 45 minutes, and so that is my job as the panelist. As the moderator. As Brian said, I work for Accenture. I'm responsible for our internal organizational culture for 500,000 people at Accenture, and a side passion job for me has been really working in the inclusion space, and in particular, faith-based inclusion, following up from everything I've learned about some of the other inclusion priorities and being able to implement that through Accenture's culture. So this panel is filled with just immense knowledge. As I was talking to the panelists before, we realized we had collective experience of over 50 years. And so without stealing their thunder, I'm going to start with Amina. And if you could just do brief introductions before we get into the actual question answer.
Sure, thank you, Sumreen. So good morning, everyone. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you all for coming. My name is Amna Hussain. I'm at Texas Instruments. I've been there 12 years. And in my day job, I work in operations. So what that means for me particularly is I interpret the demand signal that's coming from our customers and making sure that we have adequate supply to meet their needs. And how I got involved in this space in D&I is because, first of all, this is a passion area for me. And Texas Instruments has 15 employee resource groups, and they all fall under an umbrella organization that we call TI Diversity Network. So I'm one of the chairs of the TI Diversity Network.
Good morning. Hi, see, I like that. Thank you. So I'm Anila Jivanji. I work for American Airlines. I've been there for about 22 years. I'm right now in the inclusion and diversity space, and I do work with organizations outside of American Airlines. So I really foster the relationships with about 38 different organizations in the inclusion and diversity space. So it's partnerships and sponsorships is what I work with. Thank you. Over to you.
Hi there. My name is Craig Carter, based out of Phoenix, Arizona. I work for Intel Corporation. Been there for about 22 years, and I'm here with about a half a dozen others. Very nice, very nice. And I've been involved in the different employee resource groups, that's what we call them, for about 21 years, my 22 years there. I lead the Christian group there. And I'm here with a bunch of other faith leaders from a lot of other different religious groups, and some of them were not able to make it, but most of them were, which is exciting. My day job, though, again, this is part-time, right? I don't get paid for that. My real job is actually I do a lot of business analytics, product line management, and then I've been involved with a lot of large financial systems, SAP implementations. I love data, I love finance stuff, and I love charge numbers, but I like people, which is kind of a strange combination. So I'm really glad to be here.
That's great. I love it. You put the technologists on the
I
side. Well, good morning. My name is Marquis Johnson, and I am with Dell Technologies. My day job, I'm a consultant with our global sales, learning and enablement. And really what that means is amongst our 27,000 sellers around the world, we're trying to ensure that they understand our messaging, how to relate to our customers, how to evangelize what we're so passionate about, which is really enabling human progress through technology. And then for this panel, I'm so privileged to be here. I'm one of our global co-leads for Interfaith at Dell Technologies. And before I pass the mic back to Samreen, I do just want to take a second and just say thank you again to Brian and team. There's this really beautiful quote that says, if I see further, it's because I stand on the shoulders of giants. So we don't take today lightly. We don't take this opportunity lightly. We know that we are inheriting a faith legacy of people who have gone before us. At Dell, it took almost 20 years to have this faith group become a reality. So thank you for your work. You make what we do legitimate. If we can't measure it, it's not real, in the tech world anyway. So just thank you. This is such a big deal for us, and we are so humbled and honored to be here with all of you. So thank you, but thank you, Brian. This is so special. So we're fired up, just like last night, fired up at 9 a.m.
So I think to start, we have a full day ahead of us, and there's going to be lots of breakouts. The focus of this particular panel is really the business case for ERGs. And so before we can get into the tactics and the just the granularity of how to make this happen, we really need to make sure everyone understands why this is even possible. And I think for corporate America, there is a particular flavor of what's the burning platform, what is the business case for this to happen. And I think, we talked of a lot of stories and everything, so I just have some notes because I want to make sure to pick on certain people as we talk about this. But we're going to try and keep it conversational. We talked about it's not going to be kind of answer my one question. I'm sure it'll get a lot of juices flowing in the audience. I want to start with Amina. I think a lot of us are 20 years. We've been doing this work for a couple of decades. Our organizations have been. But the reality is the business cases always has to be on the forefront. And I think, Amina, I want to start with you, just given your role as a DI chair, right, and you see the full spectrum. What prompts the need for, and what has prompted in your experience, the faith-based business case relative to some of the other inclusion priorities?
Sure, I love that question because it sets the tone. So to answer from a Texas Instruments perspective, and I think it's applicable everywhere, I'm going to take you back about 20 years because that's when TI first started our faith-based initiatives. And first and foremost, if you think about it, religion is a key component of diversity. So we talk about racial diversity and sexual orientation. Religion is a key part of that equation. So I'd love for that to be this case alone for why we need to create faith-based initiatives, but we went one step further. So in 1999 and in 2000, we put together the case for why we should form faith-based initiatives and took that to our senior leadership. And we looked at some of the data. So for Americans, about half of Americans say that religion is a key component in their lives. They pray regularly. They turn to religious reflection when making personal big life decisions. Parents, about a third of American parents say that passing on their faith is one of the top 3 things that they want to pass on to their children. The other thing is that religious diversity is increasing in the US. So that's kind of the landscape that we're operating in back in 2000, and that still is applicable today. In 2001, 9/11 happened. And as you can imagine, there was a lot of fear and anxiety in the workplace. And I have a statistic here from Business Week back in 1999 that the EEOC reported a 29% spike since 1992 in the number of religion-based discriminatory charges. So that's the world that we were operating in, and TI said, okay, how can we help be part of that solution? And one of the things that we said is by forming faith-based initiatives. And what they do sounds simple, but I think it's so effective. They help build bridges, they break down barriers. When you have meaningful connections with people, I think it makes such a big difference. So I know we're short on time. I'm going to give a really, really quick story that I think illustrates this. So after 9/11, one of our Christian coworkers reached out to one of his Muslim coworkers and said, I don't know how you and your family are feeling right now, and if you're feeling safe, but if you feel any kind of danger, you and your family are welcome to come and live in my home for as long as you need till you can feel safe again. And I mean, even it's been more than 20 or almost 20 years, and that story to me still gives me goosebumps. Because when you know that people at your work genuinely care about you, you are going to bring 110% of yourself to work.
So Amina, it's interesting you say that because at Accenture, we've been very internal focused around that culture of trust and belonging. And so what more trust can you get when someone's willing to move you in with them? And so I think, and that's really when you untap someone's potential, human potentials, when you let them be that. Craig, I'm going to push a little bit more on this business case point around, we hear a lot about return on investment. And so in very tangible terms, Craig has this masterful, creative little acronym thing that he's got. So tell me about when you had to really pitch and promote and get buy-in. What are the 3 R's that you talk about when it comes to faith?
Oh boy, you're making me smile here. So again, I like to call myself the geek of the geeks. So I've worked in IT and computer systems and finance, accounting. I mean, if that's not geeky, I don't know what is. But basically, for everything in life, there's a cost and there's a benefit, right? I mean, there really is, if you look at it that way. And again, slightly biased towards the finance side on that. There's really 3 R's. So as a company's out there, and their job is to make money, and also to change the world in a positive way, right? There's really 3 R's. The first thing they want to do is recruit, right? They want to get the best people on board. They want to bring them in and convince these people, again, with 3.5% unemployment rate, extremely difficult to do right now to find the right people. You want to recruit the right people, bring them in. Once they get there, you want to do what? You want to retain them, right? How are you going to convince them to stay? Overseas, especially in India, we've had a lot of struggles with, they just walk down the street for literally cents more per hour or something, right? So how do you convince them to stay at your company? Retention. Quick story around that. Just recently, actually, it came up. We had a Muslim employee, new to Intel, a number of years ago. She would go out to her car every day to pray, in tears, basically feeling that she could not pray in the workplace. There was no special rooms for her. She didn't want to feel really different. So literally every day she'd pull her car out in the parking lot, go to the far end, and pray alone in her car. Until she realized, wait, there are prayer rooms. Wait, there is a Muslim employee group at Intel. Wow. Eye-opener for her. So do you think she's going to stay? I bet she will, right? So retention, that's the second thing. How do you keep them at your company? And number 3, I've struggled with a good kind of word for this. It's really good teams. But ultimately that means really good teams. But also that means revenue, right? R for revenue. Again, finance here, right? It's revenue. So what company wouldn't want a high-performing team, right? Everyone talks about high-performing teams. You want high-performing teams. The foundation for a high-performing team is a foundation of trust. And if you have that foundation of trust, you can start to do wonderful things together. But if I can't bring my whole self to work, if I have to check my faith at the door, if I feel like I'm going to be discriminated against, if I'm like the Muslim woman who hides in her car, right? Do you really think she's going to be on a high-performing team? No. She can't bring her full self. I can't bring my full self. So we really need to allow that to happen. So again, the 3 R's, right? So it's how do you get them, right? How do you recruit? How do you retain? And really good teams, which equals revenue. All right, well, thank you.
Marky, we talked a couple of years ago as Dell was kind of reinvigorating and kicking back, and I know at that time you were kind of looking at some of the pushback points, because it comes with any business case. And so what were some of those pushback points, and how did you manage to break down some of those walls?
Absolutely. It's funny, whenever Glenda Cameron, who actually started Interfaith for us at EMC pre-Dell, when she went to bring the conversation around having a faith-based group, she got a cease and desist response. We don't do religion and politics in the workplace. And it's like, who even bucketed those 2 things together? Like, why are those, can we clap for that? It's like, why do we put them together? 2 fundamentally different things. But I think the essence, right, there's always some underlying truth, is the reality that for many, religion has been polarizing. And for a lot of people, they've had hard experiences in their respective faith communities. So when we tout diversity and inclusion, it's, but except you. Yeah. And the reality is that if we are really going to champion this, and we have the privilege of having a phenomenal Chief Diversity Officer at Dell Technologies, we say that diversity and inclusion is not something we do, it's who we are. It's our DNA. So if you have a faith employee where their core identity is connected to their faith, but you tell them they can't bring that, you're not going to get the best out of them. You're not going to retain them. I love those 3 R's. Absolutely going to keep it. So I think whenever we're going to pioneer, anybody in the group, are you in the midst of trying to start an interfaith group or a faith group? Okay, fantastic. Well, you're in good company. So there's a lot of mindset shift that needs to happen, and it's funny, it's not just within the broader employee group, it's within your diversity and inclusion teams. It's championing and giving a voice to the faith community. You say we're gonna be inclusive, which means I need to be able to be authentic and bring my whole self. So a lot of it is understanding when people push back, it's because there's underlying pain, or there's a lack of understanding. I love last night, we said, seek first to understand before you're understood. My faith background is I'm Christian, so a big part of our identity and characteristics is grace, right? We need to give grace. So we need to understand where someone's coming from, but that doesn't mean we compromise the passion and the conviction that we have. Whether you're Christian, Muslim, Hindu, Buddhist, it's a part of who you are and it should be celebrated. So mindsets are one of the biggest obstacles, and it's just people's background. So you gotta hear where they're coming from before you can bring them to your side of the fence. Because really diversity and inclusion is about building community, and you're not gonna do that if, even firm in knowing what you're saying is the right thing, if you ostracize and push people away. The other big false dichotomy that I found, and we talked about this on the call, I'm sure it's gonna come up over the course of the day, is we have pride, we have LGBTQ, so we can't have faith. It's a false dichotomy, meaning these two things cannot exist in a workplace and there still be harmony and camaraderie. And we're here to share, nothing could be further from the truth. Just like our LGBTQ friends need to be seen, they need to have dignity and respect in the workplace, our faith communities do as well. Right. We can coexist. And I would argue any company that can actually do both is a shining light in their industry for what good could look like, not just in your workplace, but in your communities. Mm-hmm. How do you do this well? There's this really beautiful Tibetan greeting called Tashi Delay. And what it means is, I'm honored to be in your presence, and I see the greatness of God in you. Mm. How beautiful, like if we came to people in other groups with that heart and that posture of openness, how much better would our workplaces be? Mm. So whenever you go to make that argument with your diversity and inclusion group, and you go to have that dialogue with your executive teams, it's championing this idea that if you want my best, you cannot separate me from my faith. And it's that stayedness and that open-heartedness that will change people's minds around what it is. So I would encourage you, when you get objections, I'm from sales, so I'm like, objections are great, it means they're listening. When you get objections, it just means that it's something to be overcome. It's not a hard no. It's a great, okay, so you say no, let me understand why. Because from my perspective, this is what it means. And our Hindu lead, whenever we launched this group, she was like, this is the first time I felt fully seen and fully known at Dell. Wow. And she had been here for years, and she stayed in a role that she doesn't love because she feels seen and known, and she contributes so much more than her day job, but she's building a community at work. Like, that's what we're championing here. So kudos to you. The barriers are good things. They're frustrating. They'll prompt you to pray. I prayed more in the last few years for work than ever before. But there's so much fruit when we listen and we come at it with, a heart to understand, hey, we can actually do this better. But just thank you for being a voice. Glenda and I, we talk about this all the time. If we don't give voice to it, no one else will. If we don't talk about dietary options in the cafeteria for our Muslim and Jewish friends, no one else will. If we don't champion not doing barbecue events during Ramadan, no one else will. So it's really important that we give voice to it.
Thank you, Marquise. I remember writing an article that said you can't bring your whole self to work and then cherry pick the parts that are comfortable, right? Yeah. So that's a very common kind of whole self minus that little part, that doesn't work. So I just want to.
I had a comment, if that's okay,
sure.
Moderator.
I did too. Yeah.
At some point, she's going to put a rope around us and say, but one thing you said about you will meet people that are going to object. Don't take it personally. Understand why. We had it where a number of years ago, we sent out an email by accident to over 5,000 people on one of the events we were doing. Oops. And we had one person who objected, escalated the issue and everything. Fortunately, I was able to get this individual's name. Sat down over a cup of coffee and we started talking. She's a litigation lawyer. She could talk circles around me and way more intelligent than me. But we got into the reason of why she objected and why that hurt her. It goes, back to her past, right? Her father forced her to do things religiously that just ground, right? And so she just went the opposite extreme, angry about all things religious. But in understanding that, we left on very wonderful terms, and as a friendship, right? So if you can take people out of the buckets of numbers and with names, right? They have names, they have feelings. There's a reason why they're objecting. It works things out really well.
Yeah. One more comment.
Yes,
I'm going to shift.
I'll go really quick. Marquis, you mentioned a comment about polarizing and pride and faith-based initiatives. So I had a really quick comment about that because that does come up often. And one of the stories that we recently we were talking about was we have faith-based lunches with our pride group pretty regularly. And one of the great things that we found is there's so much that we have in common. So there was a woman who wears a hijab, and she was talking to a gay individual, and they were talking about how they've been in small towns and pulling up at gas stations where there's other people that come that seem a little threatening, and how uncomfortable it makes them. And so now you have a woman who wears a hijab, who practices her Muslim faith, and a gay individual who they formed this common bond. And they developed a relationship, and this great conversations come from that. So we're not as different as people often like to make us out to be.
Oh, I'm going to keep going because I want to make sure that I get the chance. There's great stories coming out of American Airlines too, and I know we may not get to everything, and so I know that all of us have peers from our respective companies that we can keep the conversation going. But I will say the business case, having done this work now for 15 plus years, is that question of the business case continues to come up, whether you've been around for 20 years or not. And I think, Anila, when we were talking, there was an interesting opportunity with the merger recently, right, where I know that this, you have to start to pick and choose what you go and fight for. And so can you just share in terms of how that conversation, despite the Christian ERG having started 25 years ago, the conversation came back in terms of how do we use this opportunity? So whether you're brand new starting or you've been doing this for 20 years, it's never a done conversation.
You're right, it's really never a done conversation. So something very interesting happened through the merger. So it was American Airlines, which is a global company, and then merging with US Airways, which was a low-cost carrier, and it was domestic. So the mindsets that were coming together were two different mindsets. I happened to be at the crux of that at the time. And so the first thing that when they brought the employee business resource groups together, they asked us, what do you think we should do first? And the first thing that came to my mind is we need to look after the people first. Because the people are then going to merge the processes. The people then are going to merge the systems. And they're going to work on the policies and procedures together. So basically what I was given at the time, and at that time, I was working with the employee business resource groups. So the first thing was to understand what is most important to the people that are going to be driving the change. And I think the first thing was, I need to know that I'm going to be okay and taken care of. But not just as a skilled employee, but as a person.
That's great.
Right? And so the first thing that we did, and I remember this project, the first project was to align the systems together. So we had a room full of 60 skilled employees from four or five different business units. And the first thing that we did is we introduced having a prayer room very next to the conference room. Now I want you to go back 7 years ago. That is when the merger really started. And the reason we did that is because we wanted to know, we wanted to make sure that those people that are starting this very, very important work, because we are going to be touching every part of the globe, because every person that is making a reservation is coming from a different part of the country or different part of the world. When we were merging those systems, we didn't want to lose even one reservation. Think about how important that is, right?
Very important.
And so the first thing that everybody wanted to do was pray, because the minute we kind of flipped the switch for the merge, things were flowing. Now think about this. In the same room, we had a Muslim praying on the knees. we had a Christian person on the knees, we had a Hindu person literally lighting a lamp, and all of it, it was surreal. I could not believe this was happening in our workplace. But before that switch went on, we had a Buddhist monk come and do all of the bowls, the singing bowls. It was amazing because it created a whole different kind of an environment. So at that merger, we started realizing that the first thing that we really need to start to focus on is our religious groups. We know that the women's group is doing a really awesome job, and we know that the pride group is doing a really great job. But what is most important to the people is what is lying in the heart, and how do we make sure that heart is alive. And that's how we kind of brought all of the religious groups up together, and we kind of created one harmonious bylaws and a structure and all of it. And now, when the pride group is sitting with the Christian group or the Muslim group, they know exactly what the role of a secretary is. You know, and so we kind of harmonized it, and that was a really, really great opportunity for us.
Did anyone else get chills? I think for those of us that work in technology, a major cutover like that is no joke. And I think the fact that you formalized the action, we're all praying anyway, right? The fact that you actually did it, I mean, that's a very powerful example of how it really comes to light. Thank you. I want to keep going. Just, you know, anytime you do, one of the things that I'm very sensitive to is you can put all the structures and stuff in place, but if you're not getting to the heart of it, it's key. The other part of driving a very sustainable change is just competing for mind share. I mean, how many of our business executives are bombarded with, but we need this and we need this and we need this. And so, you know, one of the best practices that feels very obvious is to not operate in a silo. And so I want to just kind of touch on the area of when starting and then continuing down this journey, that organizational alignment. I think there's a lot of goodness when you can hook onto something existing. And so I'm going to actually go to Craig, and I just kind of understand that the faith community has its own need, right, in terms of we want to make sure to create the affinity for why the faith ERGs are being created. But at the same time, we're trying to balance that alignment with how this actually applies to the broader for-profit businesses that we all work for. So Craig, I know that you've had experience in this in terms of trying to calibrate that in your organization, and is there something you want to help bring that to life?
Sure, I could tell lots of stories, but I'll try to be a little better on time this time. There's a couple of things. A lot of companies, the first thing they come out is metrics. I want to know metrics. I want to know the number of people involved. I want to know who's involved. I want to know where they're involved. I want to know the genders, right? I want to know the different ethnic backgrounds. But I found over the couple decades of doing this, that maybe gets you 10% of the way to the goal. The other 90% is the stories, right? And pulling these executives in. Do they kick off your events? Invite them. Ask them to stay, right? Pull them in. Tell them the story about how this employee felt after this occurred. Like I told that story about the Muslim lady, right? And stuff. Do you think that resonates with our senior executives? Absolutely. That changes things, right? It goes beyond the numbers, right? Again, like what you said, none of us want to be a number, right? Oh, we need to hire 5 more of this type of person. Really? Ouch, that hurts. I want them to look at my heart, right? They should hire me because of what's inside and allow that what's inside to come out, actually. So that's kind of some thoughts on that.
The partnering. And I think, Amna, from your vantage point in terms of having that D&I perspective, maybe just talk about some of the programming that has allowed for that what we call now, I mean, that intersection with some of the other inclusion priorities. We've touched on it a little bit, but you know, how have you been able to successfully not just put this on the front burner, but also make sure that it's hooked in nicely with all the other D&I for the purposes of long-term sustainability?
Sure, yeah, so we have had, thankfully, many events, but I'm going to pick my favorite one that we've had recently, which was an interfaith series that we had. So we invited not just the people from the faith-based initiatives, but people from all the diversity employee resource groups that we have and executives. And we started with a 3-part series. The first portion of it was having faith leaders, so a rabbi, I know it sounds like I'm starting a joke or anything, but a rabbi and a priest and an imam come to TI and just have a very open dialogue. It was a safe space for people to ask questions, and it was just so interesting hearing the questions that people had, just so they could learn more. And then the even better part that I thought was after that, we went to each place of worship. So we went to a church, we went to a mosque, and we went to a synagogue. And there were some great conversations, that happened there. And the one of the takeaways that happened is at the church, one of the imams was with us, and he was asking questions and talking about how service is such a big piece of the Christianity faith, and talking about that, and what do you do, and how can we partner together. And out of that came a program that they started doing with some of the local schools, where people from both faiths came together and started doing humanitarian work. So we really just a legacy formed after that. So there's been a lot of great examples of having faith-based initiatives really intermingle with the rest of the employee resource groups to help promote a lot of understanding and connections.
Yeah, and I actually think that tied to volunteerism and corporate citizenship. But my sense is that if we were to do some analytics around that, a large community of people working in the volunteerism and corporate citizenship probably are coming from some of these faith groups. And that's an important correlation because it's what drives them. The Abraham's tent, I think, Anila, you had some, I think this idea of fostering dialogue where it might not otherwise happen also is an important one. So you've got some good examples here.
Yeah, so what we call is an Abraham's tent that happens on a quarterly basis. And that's where the Abrahamic faiths come together. So the Christian, the Muslim, and the Jewish group. They collectively come up with 4 topics through the year. So this conversation happens once every quarter. Controversial topics like the place of women in the family, right? Now think about the topic itself. It's not only intersectional between the 3 faith-based groups, but when you're talking about the place of women, who else do you think is interested in this conversation?
Your women's groups.
Yeah.
What about the families, right? And so those are one of our 2 largest employee business resource groups. When that topic was published, it was standing room only, right? But think about how much further that conversation went. It was not just during those 45 minutes, because then what the women's group did is they used that as a base, and then they started talking about the place of women in the workplace. And then the family matters took that to even one step further, is life balance. And it's all that. So this is what the Abraham's tent started doing. And it has become such a coveted event that now we have to start publishing it ahead of time. So in March, what we're going to do is we're going to bring in our executive sponsors. And what does that conversation look like at the executive level? What we're really trying to show is that the conversation is not different, whether you're in the operations as a gate agent, or whether you are an executive that is running a $1 billion business unit.
That's good.
And that is what we want to do, is create a level of universal conversation. And the Abraham's tent is nothing better than really saying that we work for the same company and we are the same people. I put on my pants the same way like you do.
Yeah.
Right, Marky, I think this is a very important way of demonstrating how it really is. Any examples from your organizations?
We actually had the privilege, so when you're trying to do something cross-faith groups, you want to find a topic that, regardless of your faith background, you can get on board with, and we can have a unified vision for how to go make a change. So as an interfaith group, we decided to take on human trafficking as a global community impact topic. Because regardless of your faith background, human trafficking isn't a respecter of persons, geography, gender, ethnicity, socioeconomic background. It impacts all of us in our cities, our countries. So it gained so much traction within our interfaith community that our whole D&I team took it on. So it brought together for the first time ever 13 different employee resource groups with different missions, different communities, united under one front to say, we will stand for the freedom of those who cannot stand for themselves. So this was a global event that we did last year in October. It was a one-day event around the world. We had a live event in Bangalore, India, Cork, Ireland, and Austin, Texas, where we had trafficking survivors share their story. We had people on the front lines give a voice to this, and it brought such a spirit of unity with our employees that Most people didn't know it was occurring in their city. It's easy, especially as Americans, to assume it happens somewhere else. But you get that phenomenon. We heard that feedback from people in Taiwan and the UK. I can't believe this happens here. But it was such a spirit of unity. And now we're actually answering an RFP for a global anti-human trafficking organization to help them solve some of their biggest data needs. We can clap for that. It's so exciting. So like this is a part of building the business case for ERGs. Whenever you get into your communities and you understand what are the needs here, where can we build community as employee groups, and then champion the things that we're passionate about. It was all birthed out of a passion that we had as a leadership team, and then the cause caught fire. So I don't know what it will be for your companies, but try to find a cause that you can hitch yourself to. And then you'd be surprised at the turnout. We had over 1,700 employees take part in it. It was epic. We're doing it again this year. If y'all want to be involved, let us know, because it's something that's so crucial. But finding those causes really helps, because then it's not, hey, we're interfaith, so we're going to talk about prayer. We're not going to fit all of their, not that prayer isn't crucial, so please hear me. But people stereotype what interfaith should and shouldn't be. It's like, don't tell us who we should be when we grow up. We're figuring that out for ourselves. And so getting to champion these causes, we're the newest ERG within our community, so it took us from this niche kind of, if faith's your thing, then like go to interfaith, to wow, they're actually really thinking outside of the box, and they're thinking about connecting to the business imperative, connecting to other ERG groups. So we solved a problem for D&I. It was just a win across the board. Yeah.
You want to follow that one?
I'd love to follow up on that. So how do you think outside the box and stuff? Keep your eyes open. Just keep your eyes open. Two quick stories. I'm trying to make it quick here. One, a number of years ago, Intel started offering Martin Luther King Day as a holiday. It was after that first time that it was offered about 5 years ago. I realized I really didn't know a lot about Martin Luther King. So I went on Amazon and typed Martin Luther King book. Great way to do research. It's not. I don't do that. But basically, the first book that came up, he had written, basically where he selected, against his will, I found out in reading the prologue, about a dozen or so different sermons and speeches that he had written. And so in reading through that, I was amazed. Wow. Our company needs to hear this. So again, in partnering with other employee resource groups, bringing them together, now we've had the 4th year of where we have one of his speeches that's read by about 6 different people. Again, you go down, they look different, they are different races, around the country, different countries, and it's beautiful. Because why? And we looked outside the box to really help bring diversity and inclusion together. And the first year this happened, we got a couple of negative comments, again, about 1% or so, but some of them were like, why are you can see what I look like, why are you leading a Martin Luther King effort that's inappropriate? Ouch, right? I got a little work to do here, right? And so it just opened up some wonderful doors, just wonderful doors.
No, it's great. When you start peeling back the onion and you realize that, subconsciously, this is actually, and not even subconsciously, when we started doing things like mental wellness, and a huge focus area in corporate America right now in terms of mental wellness, you start to peel back some of the stigma that comes from a faith lens. Those conversations can get really deep. And I think one of the things Brian and I were talking about is this wave that we're seeing, a lot of us feel marginalized. And so when you can bring everyone together and make, there's that community that goes. I want to shift gears and honor the remaining moments we have left, but really talk about impacts that we've achieved and really how this has been a game changer or a differentiator. And I'm going to pick on Anila, because when we were talking, I was just fascinated being a customer, right? And so when you look at it from outside looking in, for customers, partners, other stakeholders, how has this really helped you be a better company, kind of on the marketing, promotional side of things?
So we're going to talk about the uniforms.
I love that story. There was a whole bunch of really great stories. For anyone who's flown American Airlines, who knew?
Yes. So, uniforms, when we instituted the new design, it created a little bit of a havoc.
Oh, wow.
People were allergic to things, and they didn't like the standards that were used to manufacture them, and it's a whole lot of things. So we had to go back to the drawing board. This was our opportunity when we went back to the drawing board to become a very inclusive designer. What we started doing is okay, so you design clothes for men, you design clothes for women, you design clothes for everybody. What about clothes for people that are going through transition? What about clothes for people, for women that are going to be pregnant? What about clothes for people that come from the religious backgrounds? And so we called it the modesty collection. That was all inclusive. Did it say that this was for Jewish or Muslim groups? No, because it says the modesty collection, right? What it also started doing is when the employees started wearing that in the front line, it kind of opened up a conversation, because now we've got a gate agent or a ramp agent wearing a hijab or a tunic. What happens to that customer during Ramadan that comes and says, I need to go and pray? So they're going to be very easily go to the person that has the hijab and say, can you please help me get an aisle seat so that I can go and pray? And then they go to the flight and they see a flight attendant with the hijab. Now it's going to be easy conversation. So that, we started with building the trust is so important. So building the trust within the employees is important, but building the trust with the customer is equally important for us. Just the mere fact of the optics, the visual optics of having someone in a modesty collection has created this trust. Once you trust a company or a brand, are you going to move away from it? We're one up right now with Delta and United.
Texas Energy. In the spirit of transparency, I flew here on Delta, but
well, they don't have the modesty collection.
yeah, no. Very true. And things to pay attention to, So, Texas Instruments, we're about to close. Yep, we are last. Texas Instruments, I feel like, has had some really good traction in this space. And so how's it been a differentiator for TI?
Sure. Now, I have like 5 stories, but I'm gonna keep them short. I'm gonna do one about solving problems, and then I'll do one that speaks from the heart. So regarding solving problems, we had a story recently where one of our Christian employees was talking to me about a technical problem that he was solving. And I'm not an engineer, so I won't be able to tell you exactly what the technical problem it was. But they were stuck. They didn't know how to move forward. And so he realized that he could reach out to one of his Jewish friends who worked in a completely different department, was a completely different type of engineer, but he thought his creativity and skill set might be able to help solve this problem. So he brought him over, and because they were friends, that person left what he was doing and came over to spend time with this other individual. And together they came together and they actually solved that problem. So that's a real business impact of, because they were friends through faith-based initiatives, they were able to solve a problem that TI was experiencing. The other that I'm going to say is more from the heart, and Ellen, if you were here for last night's dinner, she touched on this a little bit yesterday, but back in, I think it was 2017, Dallas had mass shootings where several police officers were gunned down. And also during that same time period, we looked about 6 months prior to that, around the world, there were so many tragedies due to mass shootings. And I think that just our company, our people were grieving. And so we wanted to do something, we didn't know what. And frankly, I was a little nervous about how do we bring this together? It's grief, and we're a corporation. How are we gonna pull this off? But what we did is we had each one of our employee resource groups come up on stage, and they read the names of the people who had fallen, and then we held hands, had a moment of silence, and then we had a Jewish prayer, a Muslim prayer, and a Christian prayer. And our CEO also came and spoke a few words. I have to tell you that event was one of the events that we've had the most positive feedback on. There were people who literally had tears in the audience, and they felt like this was really needed. We really needed that. And it brought people together, and it gave them a space to grieve together.
What a great note. I too don't want to end this conversation, but what a great way to end it. I think thank you for your emotional intelligence for navigating this journey. It is challenging. So we talk about business case, that continuous meeting people where they're at is a skill that cannot be underestimated. And your passion and commitment. And I think we're around all day today. For all of you, you know, I feel like as you encounter your own challenges in kickstarting and maintaining momentum, do that sharing. It's not that big of a community, and I think we're all collectively moving the needle together. So I look forward to the conversations for the rest of the day, and to all 4 companies that were represented here. Thank you and your leadership for taking this on.
Thank you.
We could have just listened for at least 3 more hours. So wonderful. And just to pick up on the jokes, since everyone knows I'm good at jokes, we really do have a rabbi, a priest, and an imam, and a preacher. We threw in the preacher. So if you all could come up. So leading this next panel, if you're following along in the program, is Bill Bowman, here to my right. So Bill has really been a mover and shaker for this whole conference for Catholic University. And if you weren't at the dinner last night, is Dean Abella here? Yes, Dean Abella. I just mentioned at the start of my comments last night that the Dean and I just met in November just to get acquainted, and I told him what was going on in all these companies. And it was like, well, we should do something. Well, let's have a conference. Let's invite them to come. And he said, let's do it in a half-hour meeting. And then the next day he asked the President Garvey, who spoke last night, and President Garvey said, let's do it. And now we're doing it. And Bill got tasked with helping to pull this all together. And if you've seen Carol McHale around, she's also been working on this. So, Bill, the panel is yours. You've got a challenge. You're going to have to shepherd, this group who are used to preaching for hours. So good luck.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Well, it's wonderful. We're going to be talking about workplace spirituality, a wonderful theme. And we have 4 excellent panel members here. I'll be the moderator. And what I'll do is I'll introduce them and then ask them a question. And then...
The mic's not
doesn't
working.
Work? Okay. Any... I think so, yeah. Maybe it's close. Okay, there we go. There you go. Wonderful. Let me start with Greg McBride, who is the Chief Flight Dispatcher and Chaplain at American Airlines. Father Greg has been dispatching airplanes and otherwise serving the DFW airport community for more than 40 years. In his role as Executive Director of the DFW Airport Interfaith Chaplaincy, he's established chapels in all 6 terminals and is building a new one now in their new Terminal F. He also oversees the board of directors and a staff of 25 volunteer chaplains from all 3 major faith groups. Besides offering chapel services and chapel masses throughout the week, DFW, oops, there I went out again.
Try that.
Thank you. Yes, DFW is one of only a few U.S. airports that have ablution stations for Muslim worshipers. Last year, Father Greg was awarded the coveted Chairman's Award from American Airlines in recognition of his work with 20,000 families and travelers annually at DFW. Let me ask you, Greg, what prompted you to visibly bring your faith into the nerve center of a major airline and the whole aviation industry?
Well, I think it was alluded to earlier. 9/11 was probably the catalyst in my life and ministry for the need for that to come into that workplace. My daytime job is I'm a chief flight controller of American Airlines, and basically what we do is we run American Airlines tactically at that control center. And prior to coming here, I was at U.S. Airways in the same role during the 9/11 event. And it obviously profoundly changed the entire world, but our industry was impacted in ways that most people probably don't really know internally what that was like. And it resulted in 2 major airlines, U.S. Airways and United, being instantly cast into bankruptcy. It cost 7,000 jobs at American Airlines in this industry. So the entire industry, and certainly in the flight control world, when I was in there one day, we're running a major airline, all of a sudden we put everything on the ground within an hour. And as challenging as that was, the real challenge began the next day when we came into a silent place. And the silence was deafening, and the fear and the anxiety that was running rampant in that space. And I remember saying to myself, I said, you know, we need God in here desperately. And I remember hearing him say, that's why you're here. And it really cast the vision for me to try to get more actively involved, more visibly involved. And that started that. I was also at that time, being at US Air, was part of the founding team that launched our Christian ERG efforts at US Airways that has since migrated after coming down here with the merger. But that's when it began in my life in ministry and really took that shape in our industry.
And are there other airlines besides those two that have ERGs that are really looking at this as an important piece of what they do for their employees?
The colleagues in the other airlines that I'm familiar with see the value in that, but I think that they have not been blessed like we have at American Airlines or we're at US Airways in our efforts to try to accelerate that. And I do think that we are leading the industry at American Airlines in that effort, and it continues to build after events like this. I've prayed into this moment, I can honestly tell you, for more than 20 years, and to be a part of this here today has been truly an amazing thing in a life and ministry that I have dedicated myself to doing in the workplace.
Well, thank you for setting the plate for a lot of the rest of us who are here now. Reverend Dr. Ambassador Suzanne Johnson Cook. Susan, okay, great. Dr. Cook was a former United States Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom in the Obama administration and was the first female chaplain of the New York City Police Department and was a 9/11 first responder. She is now the owner of Charisma Speakers and is the founder of the Global Black Women's Chamber of Commerce. If I could ask you, how did being a faith leader make a difference in your role as a U.S. International Freedom Ambassador?
Ooh, thank you for the question, and thank you for this conference. It made a major difference because it was the first faith leader, it was the first female, it was the first African American at the diplomatic table in this particular role. And if you're talking religious freedom all over the globe, you need to have somebody who knows faith. And it was a great equalizer. Even in countries that were not, in terms of female ministry led, there was a common denominator of faith. And so we could, before we went to the diplomatic table, what united us was our faith around the globe and the respect for faith. So it was amazing. And then inviting faith leaders to the table, we formed the Religious Freedom Foreign Policy Working Group. And so we invited every single person who identified, who believed or did not believe, to the table. And it formed a bond that's still going, is now institutionalized. But I think having the lens of faith said to, government, if you have this role in this office, then you should have someone at the faith table who is a faith leader. Even going through the hearings, though, what united us in times of contention, it took me 2 years to be confirmed, Senate confirmed, but it was faith leaders that came to the forefront and said, this is a woman of God, and we're going to help her get through. And it was faith leaders that helped me get through 2 years. Wow. 2 years of hearings.
That's purgatory.
Yes.
How many years?
2 years. How many?
2 years. Wow. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Rabbi Michael Shavak is the Social Responsibility Officer of the Patton Foundation. Rabbi Shavak, if I'm butchering your name.
It's all right.
That's okay, good. Thank you. Works with the granddaughter of General George S. Patton and is continuing the liberation. He teaches leadership principles of General Patton to corporate executives and to others. He is the author of 5 books and has been an interreligious leader for over 30 years. Prior to his ordination, he was an award-winning advertising creative director for Mad Men and wrote high-profile ad campaigns for Apple and Gillette, including the Best That Man Can Get series of ads. Interesting combination.
Made me the best I could be.
He continues to help religious organizations find their spiritual voice. And if I could just ask you, what is in your view, the single most pressing moral issue in business today?
Well, let me put it in context. America had its greatest power thrust economically and politically after World War II. We came back, it was as close as you get to a clean war, one where people knew really where the evil was and where the good needed to come from. And with that tremendous organization behind good, and I'd like to just say, God is just a contraction of the word good. If you get confused, it's just a concentrated good, so to speak. That we came back and we built the most enviable economy in the entire world, and we are searching for that again. Okay? The single biggest moral issue we have is that we cannot find our center because we're looking in the wrong place, and thank God we have, people of God here to help set business right. Now, we need to, the businesses need to be set on a foundation which is more than political, more than economic expediency. It has to be put in a context which, if you don't mind a slightly religious sounding phrase, creational. There is something that is a mystery from which this all comes, and we exist within it. We can have rada, we can have dominion over it. But, as it says in the Torah, if you don't mind a little bit of that, if you're going to eat an egg, shoo the mother bird away, because you have no right to own the potentiality of life itself. And our economic system, because I believe, it may be a hereditary grudge, by the way, is slightly Roman, ever so slightly Roman. It has habits that are not godly. And we need to have that wonderful free enterprise, but it has to be tethered to that freedom, as I was telling Brian, that freedom which is the unlimited, unbounded, unrestricted, except by itself, which is a nice functional definition of God. So putting our economic system back on a solid creational foundation, if we do not do it, we are not going to have success. It will elude us, and we will simply point fingers at everyone else, thinking that's the cause.
Excellent, thank you. I'd like to introduce our fourth panelist, Imam Abdullah El-Salki, who is a chaplain of Tyson Foods. Imam El-Salki is the Imam of the Islamic Center of Northwest Arkansas at the University of Arkansas in Fayetteville. He's been married for 13 years and has 3 young children, and has a deep love for his ministry, and in 2008 visited all the lower 48 states and Canada and preached in 54 Islamic centers in North America. Let me ask you, are you compromising your faith when you confirm what somebody else believes?
Compromising faith. I get this question often because I'm actually.
Speak closer.
Okay, thank you. So I'm basically providing care and chaplaincy and counseling to our team members at Tyson Foods who are not actually sharing my faith. And this is across the board because we believe in a faith-friendly workplace where every person come to work with his or her faith, celebrate their faith, live their faith at work, and we are there to watch over and walk with them their walk. Now, visiting churches, like give you an example, when there is grief, we go to church, and if there are funeral services and stuff, And that word question comes from outside. How do you feel? And let me tell you, when I was in training for clinical pastoral education, well, my advisor always telling me, get out of your comfort zone. And I did. And when I discovered what that means and what rewarding that experience is, I find out that it's not about me or my faith or who I am or what I believe in. It's about the person that I'm dealing with. It's the person who is in front of me or who's going through whatever he or she might go through in that moment, whether grief or a joyful moment. And I am there, let them celebrate their faith, not mine. I'm there living and empower them to live their belief, not mine. And in my religion, I believe firmly with, and I'm not coming to imamship from a recommendation of one person or two. We've been through academia, so I have, I believe fully that I can do that, and there is all the texts that support me to help feel with the human that we are all in it, and we are human beings, and we go through stuff regardless of who we are, or what background, what race, what religion we might come from. And that's how, that's my answer, that it's not a compromise in my religion, it's actually helping and contributing to human society, and to the society in general. And we love to see people stick and live their faith.
Wonderful, thank you.
Give an example of that.
You
Give an example.
Go ahead.
I can recall a couple of years ago, not too many people come to work dressed like I do. And got 600 people that are there every day. And the position I work at is on an elevated place we call the bridge. And someone ran up to the bridge and said, "Father Greg, we need you to come over here immediately." And I said, "Okay." So I go to this corner of the building where this lady is laying on the floor. And she is in great distress. And she's not Christian. I wouldn't find out till later. But she goes, "I just went into labor and I want you to pray for me." And I said, "Okay, well, I'll be happy to do that." So I'm praying, and first of all, I'm praying that the paramedics are on the way. And they're going to be quick. As I began praying for this lady, I said, "Well, is this your first child?" And she looked up and she goes, "No, it's my seventh." I said, "Then you need to be praying for me." And it's an example of, at the time of need, people want people of faith that value what is at the core of their being in that moment of need. And they want the love that is provided in that moment to be in their life at that moment. And that is simply what it's all about. It's about being that person in that moment. And our faith is just what is at the core of that. Regardless of what faith we worship or what God we worship, in the Christian faith, we define God as simply love. And so we're asked to love our neighbor as ourselves. And if we do that, they don't mind if I have this collar on, or if it's a Muslim asking for prayer at that moment. They're looking for someone to intercede in a moment of need in their life. And that's simply what we provide. And we're blessed to be able to do that.
Yes.
Well, since the rabbi and the priest have a story, I think the Baptist preacher should have one too. And we both alluded to turning points in religion after World War II and then 9/11. So I was on the front lines of 9/11 as a police chaplain. And in New York City, there were 4 Catholic priests, and there was an Orthodox minister, and there was a Baptist preacher, 2 Protestant preachers, and an imam. And 9/11 happened. And New York City, we used to have New York attitude, we thought nothing would ever happen to us, and then it did. And so we had to go to the front lines at ground zero while the fires were still burning, and rescue workers were hoping to find their brothers and sisters. And It didn't matter what denomination you were. It didn't matter whether you were male, female, black or white. It was, can we pray together? And I remember standing in a circle with firefighters who had been working, because I got there about 10 o'clock that night and the fires were still burning, and it happened early that morning. And they were in tears, and they had set up hospital units hoping that they would rescue someone and bring them in, and no one had showed up that whole day. And they would just, can you pray with me? And we became one through faith. And it's at the core of who we are. People just want somebody of faith to be there, to utter a prayer, to hold their hand, to let them know that God, concentrated good, is present in the midst of evil. And from that, we formed what was called a partnership of faith. And we said, we have to stop living in separation. And so we came together as people of faith, and we formed this partnership. We went to each other's mosques and temples and churches. We socialized together. We said we have to break down whatever walls that are here, and we have to start building bridges. And then that was a turning point in my ministry and in my life.
That's a wonderful phrase, one through faith.
Yes.
And maybe that's sort of the subtitle for this whole convocation here.
Just give me, my credit, okay?
Right.
That's all right. Yeah. My footnote.
There are a number of people here who are looking to form ERGs or faith-based units in their companies. There's no handbook for that. What would you, just open it up to anyone here, what would you suggest that they do to really make some progress? Here's somebody who's been doing it for a while.
I can remember how we did that at US Air. Once the need was visible, and obviously executive level management saw the need. It was showing up in the rank and file and sick calls and all kinds of other ways in our personal lives. It was coming to the workplace, and they saw that decay and simply went to them and said, something, let me tell you what I'm seeing at this level where I'm at. And you're looking at it from up here, I'm in it. And went to them with a request to meet the need. And simply, can I come here on my own time and provide a Bible study or a fellowship gathering that we can bring faith into this space right now who's desperately needed? And they honored that. And they recognized the need, and they allowed that to occur. And that took traction. It took years to get legs under it. But that ministry that I originally began years ago is still active today. And it's been going every Monday as the Monday ministry at US Air or American Airlines for almost 20 years.
So it can be something as simple as just being there, showing up, making a comment, and then watching what happens instead of getting some elaborate book.
What I really have seen evolve is a relationship with people on the floor, the rank and file, that places that person of faith in an intercessory role between the rank and file and the management level. People are much more apt to come with me with their concerns and problems before they would take it to them. And that's a wonderful thing if they can be quilled in that space, and that they can be pressed into by our faith to bring something better to them, to mitigate a problem, or to give them the love and the presence that they need to work through an issue that might become an issue before the management level, when it starts rolling into their life and their attendance and their personal decisions in life that are not maybe healthy. And so it really created a need in that environment for people of faith to be visibly present and be able to bring something in that is part of a holistic healthcare package. We've got a great healthcare package, but we as human beings, it's mental, physical, and spiritual. And as spiritual beings, we need that place in our lives addressed. And that's what that provides. And that's by going to them and selling that, and then seeing the fruitfulness in it, which they have over the years, has facilitated it getting momentum and growing and coming to the place where it brings us to this room today.
Did you want to respond?
Just add just one little thing. We're here doing religious freedom in business, but I don't want us to look at this just as a tiny event. It's a great almost indignity that religions were vacated from business. Partly because we had become excessive, we had been pushing our own agendas, And there were immoralities that supposedly people of God were doing on a regular basis, and secular life gained God's hand. Okay, God, for lack of a better term, pushed secular life so we can all sit and we have a common sense of what is right and wrong. We are in a correction here. We don't have to beg for religions to be included.
Exactly.
That's absurd, okay? What we have now is the voluntary union of industry that had been stripped of religion.
Correct.
That is now permitting conscience on a larger level to re-enter it. Okay? Please do not see this as just kumbaya.
Right. right.
This is a serious reconstruction and reconstitution and revalidation of the holiness of industry under God's hand.
Yeah.
And, faith-based communities that share common universal values, it's Catholic and universal. We couldn't do it without secular life, so let's honor them, but they're incomplete. And we have a key. And I just want to put that in context.
And thank you for that reminder. In a city like New York that is a secular city, it's difficult sometimes because the laws have it that in city buildings and even in corporations, people don't even utter the name of God in any respect. So they do their temple or their church or their mosque on their holy day, and then the rest of the week is secular. So what we had to do was, like Intel, we had to be creative and find a way, if we could not get to business, then get business to us. And we created, my church was strategically located near Wall Street and City Hall and corporate America. So we were right in the middle of it, the police headquarters. And we created a lunchtime service, which was a half an hour on Wednesday. We called it Lunch Hour of Power. And we did subway stops, and we just had flyers back then. We didn't have technology, and we passed out flyers saying, if you need a minute in the middle of the week. And we ended up having over 1,000 people at lunchtime of many faiths come together for just a midweek pick-me-up, and then they would take it back to their businesses, their place of employ, and then their employees would come saying, we're seeing something's happening with our people, so we want to be here. And from that, when 9/11 happened, then we were an institution that was already there. So the first day that New York reopened, they were like, we've got to get to Lunch Hour of Power. We called it Wonderful Wall Street Wednesday at that point. And then we could see people having a place to come. At least if they couldn't exercise it in their particular corporation or business, they knew that there was a place that they could come to at least live out their faith for just a few moments and then make it back to work and deal with the secularism that had arisen.
Wonderful. As we think about this event here today, many of you have been in this business a lot longer, obviously, but for many of us, this is sort of a launch pad. This conference is a launching pad. What do any of you think we should try and accomplish by next year when we reconvene? And sort of looking at the same issue.
He's nodding his head. That means he's good. Please.
I would like to try reversing the flow here.
Okay.
Where the hearts are on the table, our minds are joined. But I would love it if all of the different religions would take a look at their own faith traditions and extract from their deepest teachings what would be considered godly business practices. And I'd love it if they would sit in a room together and compile a solid interreligious, creational-based guide for how to reconstitute business with a conscience. I think we need to input on business, not just squeeze ourselves in so we can pray. We have a lot to say, and I'd love it to be reversed and focused not as much on community of interfaith, but all of us forming, what's the right word? An alliance. We need to have an alliance of religious people to inject conscience back into the system. And that's what I'd love to see.
Wonderful.
I think also, Imam, would you like to respond?
Go ahead.
I think also for those of us who are not necessarily in corporations to begin to utilize those of us who may be outside, may be an easy entree to come in with Brian's training team to help maybe nudge. You may have planted the seed, but you may need a nudge, or just as a consultancy, creating things like Intel talked about, like a Martin Luther King Day, which allows us to come in a non-threatening way, but we can do our thing and then sit with you as consultants. So I think not only Alliance, but for those of us who are outside, to see partnerships, ways that we can be supportive of you as you're building your ERG if it's not yet there. Because some of us have the independence outside that can do more than inside, but we can work together in partnership. But the training is going to be really important because we can come in as a non-threatening force.
I believe that the sessions that we had here yesterday and today and this meeting shed a light on the diversity and inclusion when it comes to religion. That's just perfect. We can keep on going for next to come is what can faith leaders with all many big domains to what can faith leader bring to business, how the interaction with their employees will help get the best of human resources in general. And is this soft skill necessary to the extent that they cannot, it's needed, or it's just a want based on, okay, we'll see. It's needed, and that's how we can make it. It's needed. Probably this is the same to get all the faith leaders and bring something from religious text to get it going, to get something, and because all of you know, when it comes to business, numbers is the priority, but there is also other stuff other than numbers, which is faith in human. It comes necessary to what I'm doing, why I'm fixing cars, because I care about people, want to give them better cars, and why I'm doing this, because God told me to, because I feel the call. Why I'm feeding people, why I'm cooking, why I'm doing this, because I love to feed people. Why I'm teaching, because I love to teach people. And where this all come from, how to strengthen these goals is using faith. So if we can narrow to faith and what can faith do to employees and make them better, productive, better focused, belonging, everything that's good for them in their community, in their company. That's all I got.
Can I close that out real quick? There's one thing I would like to see, and I think it's been a long journey to get to this moment. And I think one thing that corporations can do is when we have inclusion and diversity in our corporations, we need to have equity in there as well. And what is needful, in my vision, is corporations to embrace what faith groups bring to corporations, other than bottom lines. Numbers speak. But the betterment of a workforce will have a bottom line equation at some point. And for that to occur, I would love to see more visibility of our faith-based initiatives in our corporations. Visibility is what makes it look fully embraced, and also quells the fears of those who perhaps want to become part of a faith-based EBRG, but are still fearful of that at some level. But that visibility would erode a lot of that. And I would like to see that going forward out of this event and in the years ahead.
Thank you, sir. Very, very good. I want to add an R to the 3 R's. Recruitment, retention, really good teams, but reward. Because when people are celebrated for what they're doing, the rewards last night, the Ready Awards, that encourages climates to continue. And so there are a couple of mechanisms in place. One is that there's a film competition that Brian has instituted called the Dare to Overcome. You'll hear more about it later from Shireen Tabor and others. But that's an opportunity for you to show on film how business and religion are working together. But then there's also the nomination for the Ready Award to celebrate the places that it's working. And it will continue to work. And when the visibility of that continues to encourage other corporations who are thinking about it, they're kind of on the fence, they're on the edge, but it encourages them to let's try that. We're seeing American Airlines is doing this. We're seeing Intel's doing this. And I think rewards is very important. We have to celebrate the good, the concentrated God. We got to celebrate it because that makes a difference in the human spirit.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you. Well, I think our time is up. So thank you all very much for your wonderful presentation.
We're just a few minutes away from taking a break, so if you can hold with us. They're trying to fix the technology because our next session has a very short film that's going to introduce you to a new concept of how you can tell your stories through film.
Yes.
It's just going.
Looks like I need to use this one. Tom? Is this mic working? You should. Testing. Okay. So, as I mentioned earlier, I'm moved at the way that Catholic University responded to the request to have a conference like this on such short notice, and it was the right thing to do. Dean Andrew Abella is going to share with us the reason that I was attracted to come to Catholic University. Their mission here is to train virtuous business leaders. In multiple ways, we've been touching on that topic, and Dean Abella has thought a lot about it, put it to practice in business, and is teaching the next generation of business students how to do that. So, Dean Abella, we're looking forward to learning the Bush School of Business secret. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and welcome again. I was told to do a commercial break before I begin. There's a table with a bunch of books up there. I wanted to, we have put out several copies of a book that a colleague of mine and I put together called A Catechism for Business. This is a Catholic take on business, Catholic Church teaching about business. If you're interested, please help yourselves to take a copy. I had the privilege of presenting a copy of this to Pope Francis a few years ago, which was very exciting. And you talk about selling ice to Eskimos. Try giving a catechism to the Pope, you know. But another book I want to highlight, which unfortunately I don't have free copies of, but I think you can buy them, is called Business Secrets of Trappist Monks. It's written by August Turak, who's sitting right here. It's one of the finest books I've ever read about spirituality and business, and it's published by the Columbia Business School, so this is a heavy-hitting publisher. And August also has the distinction of introducing Brian and myself. So he's the real reason you're all here, ultimately. So I wanted to plug his book for him. So yesterday evening, as Imam Abdullah Salki gave his prayer, I was moved to share something with you today. I mentioned before that I was baptized and raised Catholic. What I didn't mention is that I'm originally from the island of Malta in the Mediterranean. It's a little island. Our native tongue is Maltese, which is a Semitic dialect, the dialect of Arabic. And so listening to him pray in Arabic just took me back home. But I also wanted to share with you, I think you'll find this interesting. I went to church for many years, so a Catholic church, a Christian church, praying to Allah, because that's our word in Maltese for God. So in case you didn't know, there's a community in this world that is Christian that prays to Allah. So I thought you would appreciate that. So what I've been asked to talk about today is this question of virtuous business, and I think it fits in the question of what does it take to fully bring your faith to work? Just a quick question. I'm seeing some people come in. Have all the other groups come back? I just want to make... Okay, good. Okay, I just want to make sure I'm not jumping the gun here. Good. So what does it look like to fully bring your faith to work? Because we know that that's not a given, right? We know people of faith, religious people, who don't seem to bring their faith to work, who seem to feel like they have to check their faith at the door, sometimes because they're afraid of offending, or afraid of being stigmatized. Other times, I know some people where it seems like their faith makes absolutely no difference to their work. And that can be an issue, right? There's a quote I have here from the Second Vatican Council of the Catholic Church, who expressed a concern, I'll read it, about those who, quote, think that religion consists in acts of worship alone and in the discharge of certain moral obligations, and who imagine they can plunge themselves into earthly affairs in such a way as to imply that these are altogether divorced from the religious life. This split between the faith which many profess and their daily lives deserves to be counted among the more serious errors of our age. Right? When we don't, or we're unable to live our faith out in the working world is an issue. One of our colleagues here at Catholic University, Dr. Brandon Vaidyanathan, he's chair of our sociology department, and he wanted to study this phenomenon and particularly see how it was playing out in global capitalism, particularly in the global south. So he did 2 in-depth studies, one in Dubai, which is where he's from originally, and one in Bangalore, among IT managers, 200 in-depth interviews in total. And he was interviewing middle managers in IT who were professedly people of faith, serious people of faith who are very active in their faith lives. So not just occasional participants kind of thing. In interviewing them, this came out when he talked about their faith, and they would say things like, my self-worth comes from God alone, that I feel I have to forgive those, even those who've done great wrong to me. So kind of strong religious sentiments. But then the very same people, when he talked to them about their life at work, said things like, I'm just in it for the cash. I don't care anything about loyalty to the company. They would say things like, you may not agree with what they ask you to do, but you just need to do it to get the promotion. Or they would say, I cannot trust these people. Everyone is out to just get ahead. It's this stark kind of difference between who they were as a religious person and who they were at work. It seems incongruous. To me, it seems so to him. I'm not going to mention which religion they belong to so as not to offend anyone. Okay, they're Catholic. But I do think it's a widespread problem. I don't think it's just a Catholic thing, this sort of division of faith and work. It seems that there would be many reasons why people would do this. One of which, I think, is this implicit assumption that being effective at work and being religious are at best irrelevant to each other and at worst incompatible. That some religions talk about, loving the poor and giving away and so on. And well, how could that be compatible with business? So I need to sort of separate separate my life. St. Thomas Aquinas has a quote where he says that trade has a certain element of baseness associated with it. You know, so when you read stuff like that, you think, oh, I guess there must be something not religious about business. You know, so the challenge is how to bring those two worlds completely and fully together, to live a unified life, an integrated life, right? A life of integrity, and there's something that we find very, very useful in teaching this to our students here at the Bush School, and it's the concept of virtue, the idea of virtue. So what is a virtue? A virtue is simply a good habit, right? And the opposite of virtue is a vice, which is a bad habit. So it'd be things like, you know, lying, cheating, stealing, gossiping. These are bad habits or vices. Being kind, being trustworthy, these are good habits or virtues. The virtues or good habits are ones that fit with our human nature, right? That make us and those around us happy. When you live a virtuous life, you tend to be a happier person. People around you tend to be happier. It makes sense, right? If you're in the habit of being good to others, then you'll have lots of friends and you'll tend to be successful, you know, so why not be happy? Whereas the vices do the opposite. So what is the connection with religion, you know, and virtue? The connection is the idea that God made us a certain way, right? We made us to be good. We are flawed, you know, but we are good. We're made to be good, and actually more specifically in Judaism, in Christianity, I believe in Sufi Islam, the notion that we're made actually in the image of God, right? And that being made in a certain way by God, designed in a certain way, means that there are certain behaviors that work for us as human beings, right? And virtue are those behaviors that work for us. And that when we act the way we were designed to act, everything comes out better, right? People are happier, people are good to each other, and communities flourish. The fact that our religions teach us not to lie or cheat or steal or kill is not just because it's bad for others when we lie to them or steal from them or kill them, right? But it's also, in a certain sense, bad for us, right? When I lie to somebody, in some ways I do more damage to myself than to the person I lied to. Because the person I lied to gets some typically temporary disadvantage from that lie, right? Or similar, if I stole from somebody, they get a disadvantage of losing what they stole. But what happens to me is I've made my character to be more like a liar or a thief, right? And that's ultimately much more harmful to myself than to another, right? So the point of acting virtuously, not just because it's good for others, but because it's good for ourselves as well. The really great thing about virtues is that they are habits. In other words, they can be cultivated and practiced, that anybody can grow in virtue by practicing. And this is very contrary to the secular notion of business ethics or ethics in general, where there's a sense that if it's not hard, then it's not really ethical. You know, they're just like somehow to be a fully ethical person, you must be suffering and struggling. That if there's no struggle, then how ethical could that be? You know, virtue is the opposite. The more you practice a virtue, the easier it gets. If you think about it, it's obvious. Right? The more you tell the truth, the easier you get at telling the truth, and the more uncomfortable you get if you feel like you're inclined to tell a lie. And so the more you do good, the easier it becomes to do good. And you can see why this is good for business, right? The more virtuous people you have in the business, the better, the stronger the business is going to be. There are 4 what are called the cardinal virtues, which are sort of central virtues, and then all the other virtues tend to cluster around them. I want to go through those. And then what I'd like to do is, if I have enough time, is just sort of open up to your comments and thoughts. Does this concept fit with my religion? Could this concept work in my company? Just to kind of get a sort of a practical take on this. So the first is called prudence, and it's the habit of making wise decisions. Right? So it's considering all the options, carefully weighing the principles, weighing the evidence, and making thoughtful decisions. So one who habitually does that becomes a prudent person. Justice is the habit of being fair to others, right? Giving to each other to his or her due, figuring out what each person deserves in a particular situation, in particular circumstances, and making sure they get them. So think about considering whether somebody ought to be promoted, for example. Somebody who is a just person is in the habit of considering all these things and making a fair decision. Fortitude or courage is the third cardinal virtue, and this is the habit of doing the right thing even when you're afraid, right? So it's not a question of feeling. None of these are, in fact, a question of feeling. They're a question of more of practice. So you could be terrified and still be a very courageous person if you still do the right thing in a particular situation. And again, the more you do the right thing, even when you're afraid, the more courageous you become and the easier it becomes. And the fourth one is temperance, or the habit of resisting temptation, the temptation to do something wrong, resisting what's bad for you or what's bad for others. So not eating to excess, not lashing out to others when you're angry, that sort of thing. So the proposal we have is that living the virtues is a way for religious people, and really anybody, right, to live out their faith at work, because it gives us a structure and a practice for living as people of faith in a work environment. So anyway, that's the sort of the essence of it, and it's the essence of what we teach here at the Bush School. I just love to get now your reaction. This is a golden opportunity for us to get kind of your take from your different perspectives.
I'll take the microphones.
Thank you very much. And then somebody give me a time signal when I'm out of time. So any reactions, thoughts? Yes? Yep. Nope.
How do we ride that?
That is such a great question. So first point, the folks, I'll read the question. Question is, saying that faith helps us to be more virtuous, does that imply that people who have no faith can't be virtuous? First point to make to that question always is, it was the pagans that invented virtue. So people without faith who invented virtue. So manifestly, it cannot be the case that if you don't have faith, you can't be virtuous. And so there are many people who have no faith who would aspire to these virtues. The Stoics, for example, from ancient Greece, and there are modern Stoics as well. People, they're very concerned about virtue. We, as people of faith, I think, believe we get extra help. Right? Somebody talked about grace before, and I think you can say that without offending. So everybody's free to find their own path of virtue, right? But I think we can all agree that being vicious is not a good thing. So people of faith and people who are not of faith can agree on that, right? So here's something that we can all do together. It's an extra bonus, I think, as a person of faith. I mentioned this last night at dinner, that it's really hard to do good year in, year out without God's help. I think that. It's been my experience, and I was an atheist for a while, so I know it from experience, Maybe I was just a really bad atheist. So anyway, does that answer your question? That was a great question. Thank you. Yes?
Thank you. I'm on a personal mission to redefine leadership in corporate America based on these principles.
Super.
So my question to you comes from a very personal space of the incongruence between justice and prudence, for example, sometimes when there's competing priorities that come up with bottom line, in that there's personal incentives to maybe not be just to get the promotion or not be prudent because there's a personal gain to be achieved. And so when you work in kind of economic models that are based on capitalism, often come with the survival of the fittest, the virtues, the question is, how do you reconcile and still make sure that people can operate from a place which I think is human nature natural, against the competing force that is survival of the fittest and greater individual good?
Wow, these are really great questions. So the question was, how do you manage the apparent tension, right, between living virtuously and apparently survival of the fittest,
and
right?
What gets promoted, actually elevated in corporate America so often.
Right, so sometimes that survival of the fittest notion gets promoted in a company. I have seen, and over the years, there have been a number of studies over the decades, and they don't always call it virtuous behavior, but sometimes they call it altruism, But in general, what the studies find is that over the medium and long term, what we would call good behavior tends to be more prosperous behavior. So companies that foster collaborative behavior among their employees tend to do better on a sustained basis. In the short term, it's always possible to maximize gains by cutting corners, right? We know that from every aspect of life, particularly in business. And some companies, unfortunately, cultivate a culture that encourages that sort of shortcuts. And it's not, we're not talking necessarily about illegal behavior, just very kind of selfish type of behaviors. But those companies don't tend to prosper over the longer term. And so a company that's looking for long-term sustained growth would do well to support Virtue. I want to make just a little side point to the first question. I think one of the benefits of being a person of faith is you have additional resources to resist those temptations to cut corners along the way. You know, if you believe that God's watching at all times, even if compliance isn't, you know, you have added incentive. You know, the virtue of prudence in particular, I think, is a really powerful one, and it's a word. These words are so old that they've kind of gotten misused, and to be prudent almost has this kind of negative connotation, almost as bad as the temperance. You know, the virtue of temperance nowadays we think of it just in terms of prohibition, somebody who doesn't drink. You know, but these are much richer words, and particularly prudence. The habit of making wise decisions. So the wisdom of a decision will take into account the financial implications. Absolutely, right? We're running companies. If we don't make money, we're no longer a company. You know, I explain to our students, you know, without profit, you're just another not-for-profit, and someone else has to make money to fund you, right? So the beauty of a business is it's done well is an organization that serves society and sustains itself rather than being dependent on somebody else, right? So prudence takes all of that very seriously. You know, you calculate net present values, and you look at all the legal implications, but you also look at the full human implications as well. And you know that if you violate the human implications, that doesn't go unpunished over the long term, that people will lose motivation, you lose retention, all the things that we've kind of been talking about today. Does that answer your question? Great, very good. Yes, sir.
Could you talk about the difference between virtuous behavior as a means to an end and virtuous behavior as an end in itself? And the sustainability of virtuous behavior if in fact it's merely a means to an end. I'm going to be virtuous because your studies show me it's good for the bottom line. I'm going to be virtuous because my faith says it's the right thing to do. And can you sustain it without it?
Very good. Being virtuous as a means to an end versus virtuous as an end in itself. There's again, great question. Both are good, and I'll explain why. There's an element with virtue of fake it till you make it. That if you're not courageous, you know, and you're terrified of everything, you just try. You know, you just try. And let's say you're trying because the research says if you do, you'll feel better. You know, so you try. Eventually, you keep trying it hard enough, you eventually become courageous. So you get there. And then what you discover along the way, to your second point, is, and this is why I think virtue theory is, as you say, it just so aligns with who we are as human beings, and why it trumps by far any other theory of ethics. So I mentioned last night I did a PhD in business ethics, so I studied all the theories ad nauseum. No theory other than virtue ethics can give you a solid reason why should I be ethical. They'll tell you how to be ethical, but there is no answer as to why. They'll say things like, well, you might get caught. Okay, well, or maybe not. Are you a gambling kind of person, you know? Well, people won't like you if you don't find out. Well, I don't care about people. You know, you have these responses, there's comebacks to every reason that people would give for every other ethical theory as to why be ethical. But virtue basically says, if you live this way, you will be happier, right? You will be a happy, fulfilled person if you live according to virtue, because that's the way you're made. It's like having a healthy diet. You feel better because that's the way you were made, you know? And I've never heard come back say, well, I don't care about being happy. Then you're crazy, you know? Because everybody wants to be happy. So you might start out doing it as a means to an end, but along the way, I think you discover that this is what a happy life is made of, you know? So it's you wouldn't continue, I think, to do it just as a means, because you'll realize that it is not only an end in itself, but in a certain sense, the end of human life. Does that help? There was a question of, okay, yep.
One question and then I have a question.
Sure. Sorry, I skipped over you before. You had your hand up before. Yeah.
Mine is short. So as a resource for the topic that was brought up in terms of survival of the fittest, there's a book called Givers and Takers, I believe. And it explains how those who are givers tend to be more successful in business, even as an individual business, as a society or business. Give and take? Okay, there you go.
Give and take. Super.
Yeah, correct. And basically, it creates trust and culture, and then that's why the whole institution arises and does better.
Thank you. Quick comment, and then Brian's question. It works everywhere, right? That God made us this way. That everything works better when people are good to each other, right? Absolutely, everything works better, short term, long term. The only problem is when people don't want to do that, right? Or don't have the strength to do it, or choose not to do it. So virtue is all about getting in the habit of being good to each other. And the more you get in the habit, the easier it becomes. Yes, sir.
So I think I can speak for everyone here that we're so appreciative that you've opened up the business school for this conference. And my question is, we want to, as timekeeper, I have to move to the next speaker. Can we come back next year and you can tell us more?
Remember, he said when he came to meet me, how quick it took me to make a decision. So my answer is yes. You are most welcome. Please come back.
It is. Couldn't we have taken much more? I mean, just that's the tip. I mean, we should all take a course from Dina Bella, and so thank you so much. Our next keynote speaker, and someone that I've gotten to know through Texas Instruments. This thing sort of is contagious between companies. In May, Texas Instruments partnered with the foundation to hold an event similar to this, but a bit different. It was mostly just one or two panels and some discussion. American Airlines was there. That's how I got to know them. Of course, Kent Johnson was the rabble-rouser behind it all. And he invited Sue Warnicki from Salesforce to come. And you're going to introduce your other Salesforce colleagues, I hope, as you speak. And what an amazing story. Personal story she has, and also what's the company's done. So, Sue, I'm just going to turn it over to you and tell us the Salesforce Faith Force story.
Let's see. Can you hear me? Wow. Well, thank you very much. I want to ask a question. How many of you have been in a meeting where it's an alignment meeting, you're trying to get to an end, and it's a lot of people, and it's a lot of work, and you're getting close, and it feels kind of like a ball is finally rolling down a hill. It feels good. But then something happens, and somebody says something that kind of changes everything. You been in that situation? So I work at Salesforce, the #1 CRM in the world, one of the fastest growing enterprise businesses. We help customers with all of their management. We build apps. And I work in the technology organization. And I was in this meeting a few months ago, and it was one of those. And we worked for hours trying to get alignment on this new infrastructure strategy. We were about 15 minutes from the end, and there were about 40 people on the call all over the world, crouched in conference rooms on their laptops. And somebody in Seattle says, "Can I say something?" And we're like, "No." He keeps talking, and he says, "I want to throw something out there. I think we've buried the lead." And any journalism people out there? This man happened to be a journalist in his former life. And that's kind of a serious thing. When you have buried the lead in a story, it means you've missed the boat. It means you're telling the wrong story.
and it means you have to start over, right? And, you know, silence befell this meeting, and nobody said anything for a moment, and this person is a friend of mine, his name's Byron, and he said his heart was racing and he thought he had committed career suicide. And the first person spoke up and said, "What are you talking about?" And the next person said, "Let's get back to business." And the third person, who happened to be the leader of the meeting and a very top leader, said, "Tell me more." And he started to make his case, which had taken him the whole meeting to formulate. And one by one, you know, I mentioned this, it felt like this ball rolling down a hill. One by one, people started to see the truth of what this person was saying, that we had missed the lead and we needed to start over. And one by one, they kind of came behind him. And in the course of 10 minutes, pivoted this ball. And it would have to start over, it would have to go back uphill, but together we could push the ball. And you know, there's a quote, Patton was mentioned earlier. My favorite quote from Patton says, "Courage is fear. Hanging on one more minute." That's what this guy up in Bellevue had done. He had taken a courageous step. He didn't want to, but something told him to take that step. And I believe each and every one of you here today is one of those courageous people who, you know, when momentum was pushing down a hill, you were the lone voice at some point saying, "I think there's another story here. I think there's more to this." And some of you have been pushing that ball for 25 years. Some of you are just starting, I'm just starting, right? But there's momentum. And what happens when people get behind you is you get closer to the top. And I believe that we are today standing in the center of a tipping point. In the faith diversity movement. I think this room is the center of a tipping point. And what happens when you crest a tipping point? What does that ball do? It rolls. It rolls without you even pushing it. It has momentum. You have created a virtuous cycle that lives on its own. And we're at that stage because of brave voices like all of you. So I'm going to talk today about my story, the Faith Force story, and hopefully some tips that may apply to you. You know, my story is that it's pretty ridiculous, actually, that I'm standing up here at a faith conference for anybody who knows my story, because I was a very proud agnostic my entire life. I grew up in a very strict religious city, and my family was not religious, and so I was an outsider. And I began to really hate religion. And I spent my entire life, not just agnostic, but anti-religious. I'll give you a snapshot. When I was getting my master's and starting my PhD program, I taught literature. And I would tell my students, I'm still bubbly, I was bubbly then, and I would say with open arms, you can write about anything that you want, except religion. I virtually forbade it, okay? That was most of my life. And then life happens, and about 3 years ago, I experienced something really radical in my life. And you can read about that, I talk about it all the time. I have a blog called leanership.org. Lean, not lead. But I converted to Christianity. And I was baptized in Easter 2017, so just 3 years ago. And I showed up to work the next day. The most transformative event of my life had just happened. And I ran into a colleague, and she said, "What did you do over the weekend?" And I had an identity crisis in that moment. I hadn't come out of hiding yet. What do I stand up for this new Jesus that I said that I believed in? And I took a deep breath. And I said, "Nothing much." And it was was devastating, that moment. I had failed in this new identity. And my desire was to hold away and say, I obviously don't belong here. I don't see anybody like me. This is not a place for me. But instead, I started to ask questions. And I started to ask people, what do you think? Do you think I can wear my cross? I don't know. And they said, I think so. And the more people I talked to, I found out that people of all faiths and atheists felt that they had to hide or wondered if they had to hide. They weren't sure. And then I encountered these incredible trailblazers named Michael Roberts, who happens to be here. He was in Australia at the time. Farah Siddiqui was in Chicago. And I found that they had already started this process to start an ERG at Salesforce, a faith ERG. And I was annoying enough, right, that they eventually let me glom on and help launch this group. So, it was 2 years ago. I've only been around for 2 years. And the first launch we had was in San Francisco, which is where I am. So imagine San Francisco, which is pretty well recognized as one of the least religious cities in the world. And I'm in the lobby of Salesforce handing out flyers for this thing called Faithforce. And I got a lot of weird looks, I'll tell you. But we launched and we had a panel with atheists and Buddhists and every religion, and people shared simply what their faith meant to them, how they celebrate the holidays. About 60 people showed up. And then we had other events all around the world. And, it was pretty fast, the attraction to this thing. And, our leaders, and we've got other leaders here in the room, we've got Matt Deep, we've got people from here from Reston, and we are so honored that we get to do this. We get to watch this happen. It didn't take a whole lot of effort on our part. And one by one, people came to us. We started with 3 groups, and then 5 cities, 10 cities. We are now 17 cities all around the globe. It's the fastest growing ERG in company history. It's the one that executives talk about more than any other. Mark Benioff, our CEO, wrote a book this past year called The Trailblazer. And in it, he devotes a chapter to equality and diversity. And he names one group to exemplify that. You probably guess what that was. That was Faithforce. So they're telling our story. Why? Because they see what it looks like. And this is what it looks like. It looks like incredible celebration events. We had our first ever Muslim celebration for Eid, and hundreds came out. And that happened all over the world, and people, Muslim employees were in tears because they felt seen for the first time. And we had Easter, we had all these events, so celebration was a big pillar. Also philanthropy is a huge uniter, as all of you have attested to. We have, just in the past year, given 6,000 hours to over 90 faith-based nonprofits. These are just Faithforce members have given 6,000 hours in the past year to volunteering at faith-based organizations. We do a huge World Refugee Day event with UNICEF and World Vision and on, so it's just beautiful. We do education events. We partner with our LGBT group, we partner with our veterans group, ability group, and we put on education events. We help events teams make huge events like Dreamforce, the biggest technology conference in the world, are now faith-friendly. We have prayer and meditation spaces. We have halal and kosher foods. People come and they pray. Customers pray. Customers who build trust with us, who pray with us, who hear our story, and decide to invest more. Of course, it helps innovation because we are servicing hundreds of faith-based organizations that are providing disaster recovery, who are coordinating 3.4 million volunteers, who are ending sex trafficking. They're using our app to do that. That makes us improve our product. We have new use cases. So this is beautiful, and people are seeing it and flocking to it. But then something happened. October 27th, 2018. What was that? Anybody know? Pittsburgh. It was the Tree of Life shooting.
bed and I woke up Sunday morning and I turned on the news and I saw this horrible thing, and I thought, because now I had befriended so many Jewish employees and I felt for them, and I felt what this must feel like for them. And I got an email from one who said simply, Sue, we have to do something. And I was like, true, what can we do? We're Salesforce now. We're sort of responsible for this community. I emailed Michael and Farah, and we said, let's do a vigil. And we pitched it to our Chief Equality Officer, Tony Profit, that day on a Saturday, and he answered us, and he said, absolutely. And we didn't know what we were doing, but I posted that night at about 10 p.m. on Chatter, our social network, and said, we're having this event, we stand in solidarity, feel free to share your words of support, here's some links. And I went to bed. And the next morning, there were 1,000 comments, views, and likes, and shares. This touched people, and it opened up a door, it released them to love each other in a way we've never seen in this forum before. And it was a beautiful event. We had a rabbi come, we lit candles for the victims. He told us about mourning rituals in the Jewish faith. And it was about 10 minutes before the end of the session, and a woman raised her hand in the back, my co-organizer, and she said, there's a call on the line from Pittsburgh, and I think you should take it. It was an employee. And he said, and we opened up the line, and he said, my name is Ari. He said, my cousin was one of the victims. He said, my other cousin, his sister, survived by hiding in the boiler room. He said, thank you for giving my family a voice. This is transformative, what's happening. It's not just not divisive when implemented properly. It's not just good for business, which it is, but this is good for humanity. This is not only not divisive, but it is an antidote to divisiveness. And people are seeing that, and we are part of that. And there's a big responsibility that comes with that, because standing at this precipice in the center of a tipping point means that we are holding that ball together. And we need to go out into the world and continue this message and talk to your HR and your diversity leaders. And it's okay, by the way, if you're early on this ramp. If you look up and it looks daunting, that's okay. That's where you are. And all that's needed of you is a baby step. You don't have to be the one pushing it over. The reason Salesforce has crested the tipping point is not because of our greatness, right? It's because of many people who paved the way. And it just happened to be that right time and place, right? But if you're at the beginning, that you really are that brave soul that has raised their hand and said, I'm going to hang on for one more minute. I'm going to be courageous and just take that baby step. I'll share just a few of the quick implementation tips that helped us. They may or may not apply in your world. And then we'll end. But for us, the biggest thing is that we are outward focused. Yes, Christians, we have Bible studies and prayer rooms, and the Muslims meet together for prayer, and the Jewish employees. But that's like 5% of what this is about for us. This is about giving. This is about lifting others. Every single event we put on is co-organized. Easter is organized by the Muslims, and the Jewish employees, and the Hindus, and the atheists. And Eid everything is co-organized. There's no silos at all. Another thing is that we very actively include our atheist sisters and brothers. Having been an agnostic, I empathize greatly that they are misunderstood and often judged. They feel just as much pain as we do, and it will behoove all of us to include them and learn from them. We have an atheist event going on in like 3 days called Stories from an Atheist. Another thing is we're very clear on what we're not. And we say that every single time we talk about Salesforce. We say we are not proselytizing. This is about changing your views. We're not political. It's not a platform for us. And we're not homogenizing. is not squishy pool of spirituality, everybody thinks basically the same. It's not that at all. This is honoring the distinctions of everybody's faith. Another thing is that we are compassionate for HR. You know, sometimes we put up an us versus them dichotomy, and we think that they're stopping us. Any HR or diversity inclusion leaders in the audience, we love you. You are not the enemy, and we need to sit with our leaders and understand them, because it is not easy, the decisions that they have to make and the momentum that they are pushing against. So just empathize with them. So just as a final reminder, you know, think of that quote from General Patton: courage is fear. Hanging on one more minute. And I'll end with a quote from our beloved FaithForce Global president, Farah Siddiqui. She said, she posted this on Twitter a few weeks ago, and I loved it so much, it's become my favorite tweet ever. And she said, faith inclusion equals inclusion. Human resources and diversity and inclusion leaders need to say, faith diversity, I see you. I see you, and I hear you, and I welcome you, and I make space for you, because there's space for everybody. Thank you.
Okay, next, wait, no, stay here.
Okay.
Next year, I'm going to bring Kleenexes. So we have a small, just a small gift for you, and I'll just say what it is. It's a compass, and for your desk, and you know, just keep that true north. I mean, such an inspiration. Thank you. Is this okay? I think this one's on. So, this is okay. Just to shift gears a little bit and deal with one of the topics that will be in the breakouts in the afternoon. There's a lot of legal issues. Last night, President Garvey, he's a lawyer, and he went through some of the laws. One of the great organizations in the United States that you may not have heard of, but we're going to hear a little bit about it, and they've sponsored our lunch today, is the North American, get the whole title right, North American Religious Liberty Association of the Seventh-day Adventist Church and their Public Affairs and Religious Liberty Commission. And I have, as I shared last night, a little bit of story about Super Balm. You weren't there last night, but I shared about the Super Balm story. Also, 3 of my 4 kids, including Melissa, who you met last night, were born in China in the 1980s, and only 1 was born in America. And so if you can't have your kids born in China, choose an Adventist hospital. So my other was born in an Adventist hospital in California, in Glendale. So I'd like to, Orlin is over here. So Orlin Johnson is going to tell us a little bit about the work they do defending and supporting people, faith in the workplace. And as you've heard, Seventh-day Adventists worship on, on a day of the week when many employers expect people to be at work. Orlin, thank you.
Well, thank you a lot, Brian, and I appreciate being here. First of all, happy Valentine's Day to everybody. Just got a cool note from my wife. She liked the gift, so I'm in good shape. It's interesting. I practiced law for about 25 years. I worked for the Adventist Church for about 5 years, but now I've been to a session on chaplaincy, so I'm going to go home and tell my wife about the new job I want to take on. So I want to thank Karen for that powerful session we were in. But it was great to be a part of it. But I would just like to say that, when we think about, there was a time in life where we all used to think that there were 2 things we never talked about in polite company. We never talked about religion, and we never talked about politics. That was the thing that we used to avoid. Well, now everywhere we go, all we talk about is religion, and all we talk about is politics. It's amazing how the world has just transformed into this whole different operation. But the interesting thing about religion, it has become a significant workplace issue. And many of you are probably starting to see that. I mean, when you go back to the original tenets and you look at Title VII that defines religion very broadly, it talks about it from the standpoint of having the traditional religions like Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Buddhism, and things of that nature, but it also has this little nuance where it talks about it also includes religious beliefs that are new, uncommon, and not part of a formal church or sect. Which means if it's going to be something you have to be responsive to if it's new, and if it's uncommon, that also means that now, in particular those who may be in the HR field, you have to spend a lot more time gathering new information all the time. So what ends up happening is that you will find out that even the accommodations that you may currently have in place may find themselves to be kind of out of market in a very quick order. And I think it's important for us to realize that we've kind of gotten to a place where we understand really sexual harassment and the responsibility that employers have, but religious accommodations is really starting to fall, for all intents and purposes, in a very similar state. And it's important that we understand that this is not just something that we ought to do because it's a good virtue, but it's something that probably businesses are going to end up doing because it's just good business. The bottom line is now starting to be impacted in a major way as it relates to those organizations that do not understand how you must go about making sure that there is no discrimination taking place from a religious standpoint in the workplace. But I think in terms of what we would look to do, and in my organization, which is a North American division of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, we try to focus on the aspect that religious liberty is very important, freedom is very important, but it's also important to understand that if people don't understand your religion, don't understand who you are, it's impossible for them to really connect with your doctrines. So part of what you will end up noticing is that it's important for us to be willing to gather information, to learn new things. The tagline our office tries to operate from, what we keep very simple, is we call it making friends before we need friends. Knowing who you are, understanding what I'm all about. You know, the bottom line is most people don't join churches because of the doctrines. No one joined the Seventh-day Adventist Church because they said, I didn't want to watch TV on Saturday. You join the church basically because the people who you meet there, you connect with. There's a specific feeling that you have. So the fact is that one day you may be of one religion and tomorrow you may be of another religion, and I don't have the ability or the standing to judge you in any way. And that's why it's important that the fight that we fight in the neighborhood of religion has to be something that's non-denominational. So as a Seventh-day Adventist, I can't just go out and fight for Seventh-day Adventists. I can't just go out and fight for accommodations for the Sabbath in which we worship between Friday sundown and Saturday sundown. It's important that I fight the fight for every religion. Because I still think that the adage that's important that was brought out by Dr. Martin Luther King is injustice for one is injustice for all. And sometimes we, even whatever our religion may be, we get comfortable in looking through what I would call the windshield of our life, not worrying about what's going on. But if you look in those side mirrors, you'll find out that objects in those mirrors are a lot closer than you may think. And one of the reasons why I think this is very important is because we obviously live in a great country, but 80% of the world does not get to worship their God the way they see fit. 80%. Which means if it's happening in somebody else's backyard, it may be slowly chipping away and could one day happen in your backyard. And that's why it's so important that we sit back and take a look at what's going on, understanding the big picture. Our church was responsible a few years ago in working on a case that many of you have heard about called Abercrombie & Fitch. It was a Muslim young lady who was basically denied employment because she wore her hijab to work. And they told her that that did not fit her the company's looks policy. We were proud to be part of an amicus brief where we pulled together probably about 10 other religious groups to basically go out to the courts and say that that's wrong. That's not what you're supposed to do. And thank God the Supreme Court ended up giving us a very strong decision in her favor and basically making it clear that you cannot judge individuals and determine whether or not they should be employed or not based on clear religious principles. And this is really, really important because now businesses are really starting to feel the impact because Millions of dollars now are being paid by employers who fail to understand how to go about this process in the right way. And one of the things, I was looking at the EEOC website the other day, and in 2017, in the fiscal year, companies paid over $10 million in settlements to the EEOC as it relates to violation of religious accommodations and coming to settlements as a result thereof. I was kind of interested also when I was looking at some studies that were done. There was one that was done by George Cunningham that was basically coming to the point where he gathered information from 260 different organizations regarding religious policies and views. And the final analysis was when people feel like they are working in an environment where they are different and those people are not connected to other people, they're less productive. And people who feel like they're part of an organization in which they can tolerate the differences seem to be a lot more productive. So not only are we talking about fines and penalties and things that may come from being in a position where you're violating Title VII, but you actually will find out that your workplace is not as productive. Let me just tell you about a few cases and we'll close out in here in this particular session. You know, there was a senior living properties company that owned about 35 senior assisted living facilities. They ended up having to come to a settlement with the EEOC because they fired somebody who was in their dietary services who wanted to be able to take Sundays off so they could attend church. They thought it was okay to tell them no, and they ended up having to pay a fine or a penalty as a result. A North Carolina Taco Bell operator ended up paying a six-figure settlement because they decided that somebody who was practicing the Nazarite principle and their religious belief forbade them from cutting their hair, thought it was okay to tell them if you don't cut your hair, you're getting fired, ended up having to pay a six-figure settlement on that. Burger King franchise fired a cashier because she was of a faith that was told that you don't wear pants, that from a modesty standpoint, women should wear skirts. And as a result, they wanted her to wear pants as part of their uniform. They fired her, and what ended up happening? They ended up paying a large fine and penalty. Belk, a department store, in 2011 had an employee that would not put on a Santa hat and apron. And they were told, well, if you're not going to be part of what we do here, you're going to be fired. Well, they found out what the cost is of firing somebody who has a religious belief that doesn't fall in line with what they want to do from a policy standpoint. And one of the ones that I found really interesting, and when you talk about those uncommon and religions you may not be familiar with, Red Robin ended up having to settle for a very large six-figure settlement because they wanted an employee to cover up a wrist tattoo, which turned out to be part of his Kemetic religion, and it was an ancient Egyptian faith. And the tattoo itself actually was the scripture from his Egyptian Bible that was on his wrist. Do you see how difficult it is when you actually come out and you look at somebody and you try to determine who's religious and who's not? There was a case we looked at, and I'm sure many of you have probably heard of I think it's called the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monsters. Anybody familiar with that one? I remember when I was looking out and I saw the picture of the pirate, and he was in prison and he was told that he couldn't wear his pirate outfit. And he came back and said, but it's part of my religion. And on one hand, when I saw it, the first thing I wanted to do was to smile, and I said, oh man. And I believe they call themselves Pastafarians. And so when I started reading that and laughing and thinking to myself, but you know, in reality, I shouldn't laugh at anybody's circumstances, because what is important to them is important to them. And we, as we move around as what I would call citizens of a greater virtuous maybe environment, it's important for us to be able to understand that we must look at things in a way in which we're looking at an expansive view of who people are, but more importantly, from a business standpoint, we are starting to see that there's a real bottom line that's attached to it. So what we try to want to make sure that everyone focuses on, workplace accommodation is important. We like to be out on the front lines fighting for it. That's part of what we do in our office and in conjunction with other religious organizations. But it's important for you also to realize that it's something where you have a responsibility through Title VII to be the best that you can be in that environment as well. And at the end of the day, good business, good bottom line, virtuous society, living in a place where people are comfortable and enjoy their work environment, it's what it's really all about anyway. And more diversity that we can have and inclusion really generally just makes our workplace a lot better place to be. So I just wanted to take a few minutes today to talk about some of the things that we've done give you an idea of some of the things that you should be looking for. But at the end of the day, I'd like to say that we live in a great country, but there are slowly things that are chipping away regarding individual freedoms. Don't be a part of thinking that we have nothing to worry about because we live in this great place, but to understand that it's my responsibility and your responsibility to stay studied up, to stay prayed up, to stay connected in some way so that we may be best to deal with those people that we work with in the workplace. So thank you very much, and I appreciate your time today.
So one opportunity that you all have in being involved in faith in your workplace is making sure you're not on one of his lists. Yeah. So, and again, enjoy lunch at 1:30, then we'll reconvene to look at your program for the breakout sessions. And thank you again, North American Religious Liberty Association and Seventh-day Adventist Church for feeding us lunch today. Thank you.
Thank you. Shout out.
So we're going to go into the last panel immediately. And Kent, don't go too far. Kent. Hey, Kent. Yep. So we're going to go straight into the last panel.
Okay.
And that's you.
Yes.
So the other groups that were having breakouts were finishing up and they're coming in. This last panel is really the capstone, and we're going to be talking about what we sort of alluded to through different sessions is the ball's rolling. How do we keep it rolling? Kent, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay. Thank you. Well, we have come to the end of our substantive presentations, really. And now I think there's a spirit a lot of us have. This is a good thing. And the question is, how do we export this? How do we fan the flames? There's some good that's happening in the world because of this kind of an effort. And it's worth putting some effort to strategically think together about how this movement can take the next step. And that's what our panel here today is going to address, and it's an eminently qualified panel. I think Heather Bellatria of Annex is here to speak about this. And Heather has been in the Faith in the Workplace movement for more than 20 years, I guess. Certainly 10. I've been connecting with her on a regular basis for at least 10 years.
Yeah, Annex has had them for 25 years, and I've been involved with them for 15. Yeah.
Yeah. And we have next to her Eric Welch, who is the leader of the Christian Employers Alliance. And he also is the ringleader for a Christian Employee Resource Group network that some of us have been involved in gathering on a regular basis. And they have seen trends. And he can speak to trends, and he can speak to the pulse of ERGs in that context. Because in those meetings, which are predominantly Christians, we talk a lot about other faiths as well and the development of groups for them. We have Mandeep Bawa from Salesforce, and he brings the benefit of just the Salesforce environment and that exciting new energy that's coming out of the West Coast and that whole arena. Salesforce just continues to amaze me. And to get your perspective on the movement, what's happening, are we at a tipping point, and where are we going, that would be great. And you've met Craig Carter before of Intel, and he is also a energetic person involved in the Faith in the Workplace movement. So I want to just dive right in and ask, you know, there's this sense, certainly in this room and among the people that we've been talking to, that there's an accelerating interest in faith in the workplace broadly. Do you see evidence of it? Is it true? Can you speak to personal experiences, perhaps, that provide signals or signposts that make you believe one way or the other, whether there's an accelerating interest in faith in the workplace?
Sure, absolutely. In the last 15 years that I've been involved with the American Express Christian Network, which is called SALT, in the last 5 years, I think there's been a greater acceleration. And I think it started when I got in touch with Eric and we decided to do this monthly call. And it was exactly 5 years ago, this past December. And, we just had about 10 companies on the first couple calls. And then now I think there's about 48 different companies that are invited to attend the call. And a few of those are ones that we all together helped form. So I think it's just a matter of, like the old saying, I told two friends and they told two friends and so on and so on. I'm dating myself with that commercial, shampoo commercial. But it really has accelerated quite a bit. And even just today, seeing everybody today and seeing the excitement and other events. I went to a Work Matters event last October. There is definitely an increased awareness, and from all sectors, not even just from the employees at the grassroots level, but HR executives, senior executives, all around.
Okay. Anybody else?
Good afternoon, everyone. So again, just from my experience, when I came here, I was talking to a few people outside. You come here and really you feel like you're coming home. You're coming to your second family. You have your family at home, but I mean, there's a lot of folks who I don't know, but really I get that, you kind of get that big hug feeling almost just being here. So, and again, just seeing faith and work up on the screen, it's something that I've never had the opportunity to talk about before. So I've been in the industry for many, many years, and just to have that conversation about faith at the workplace, it's just fantastic. And to your point, Kent, it's absolutely, my personal journey, when I first found out that we had a faith force here at our company, Salesforce, I was extremely ecstatic, because what our company does is, we connect our customers to their customers in a better way. And I think what our CEO, Mark Benioff, and also our Chief Quality Officer, Tony Profit, what they've done, they've allowed their employees to connect to each other in a better way by just having these ERGs, and so I'm really, really thankful for that.
And just a quick little story on this topic also. It was actually, this is one of 3 different stories, which all happened this week, actually, as I was bringing up, I'm going to this conference. There was a lot of excitement, and one of the things that got me thinking about, and use this as a prop even, is what's the cost of wearing a mask at work? I was in the cafe talking to a very senior director, which is really awkward doing this, right? What's the cost there? A senior director at the company, and I mentioned this, and this gentleman is bold. He's big. He's an up-and-coming, he's about 2 inches away from being a vice president. He's an up-and-coming person at the company. He got into very muted tones. All of a sudden, when I said, I'm going to this conference, he said, thank you. Every day, going to work for over 20 years, I put on a mask. I cannot tell people what I really believe. I'm afraid of what might happen with my career. I'm afraid where this might go. Thank you that you and others are actually taking strides to change this. And I felt sick. inside. Here's one of the up-and-comers that imagine how good this individual could be if actually he did not feel like he had to wear a mask to work every day. And so what we're doing is really amazing, and the need for it is really coming out, which is really exciting, and so it's wonderful.
What do you think are the main influencing factors that are driving this right now? Seems like we're at a tipping point. What are the driving factors?
We've talked about there are multiple factors, of course, and we're really at this place of intersection of these different ones. One of them is the integration of faith and work.
Yeah.
I believe in multiple faiths. Just an increased appreciation that our faith impacts our whole lives, and that our work is the largest portion of our time. And digging into the roots of our scriptures and understanding that this is just a very common element, I think, is one thing. Second is in the companies, and many of them have been happening for a long time, we've observed both the depth of the individual faith relationships as well as the interfaith conversation. That has really accelerated, and it's been the both and of those that I think has made people feel comfortable, but also very relational in this shared understanding. Then I'll just say one more. I think social media clearly has been an element of this that has accelerated those things, and there's many more.
Share some of the others then. Put you on the spot.
Well, I'll wait.
Okay. All right. So we've talked about the business case for action and all that. I think of this conference as something that can fan the flames of the next generation of what's going to be happening. So let me ask now to the action plan. What can be done? What should be done? What could be done by people in this room, done by you all, to fan the flames, to get this movement moving?
I think that something that happened a few years ago really was surprising to me. After starting to get to know some of the folks on the call, and I really got a close relationship with the woman that leads the Apple faith-based network, the Christian ERG, and there were quite a few new faith-based networks in the Silicon Valley area, and she said to me, could you come, because we're all kind of like toddlers running around trying to figure this out, like, could you come for a couple of days and just share with us some of your learnings? And that was an event that turned into, like, Apple was hosting it, but Google, Facebook, LinkedIn were also in attendance, which was just in itself kind of wild, because I was meeting the Google person as they were coming in, and you see the new big iPhone on display, and he's like, I got my Google phone here, I don't know if they're going to let me through the door with this, but it was just a neat way to see that even, intense competitors, just put everything else kind of aside for a bit and, spend a couple days together and, we learned from one another. And, here I thought I was just going to be imparting everything that I knew, but they had these really novel ideas about how to, work their network, and it was great. So it was a great exchange. I got some fresh ideas to take back to American Express. So, but that was a really great example of, just they saw a need and they wanted to share best practices live and just, for like intensive time where they really realized, there's some things here we don't really know how to handle. Can you help us navigate that area? So it was good.
Yeah. Mandeep, your organization in particular has been very high profile in this area in just the last year, especially, it seems. Can you speak to that a little bit? How has Salesforce just are they on a mission? Because they're not just talking about what's going on at Salesforce.
Right.
You all are fanning the flames, I think, talking about the good to society that comes from this. What's behind that?
Yeah, so it's interesting you mentioned that, because our CEO says the business of companies is to make the world a better place for the communities that we live in. And I think everyone here would agree the reason that we're all here is really, I'll kind of point to the sign back there, right? Be a force for good. And one of the things that we've done at our company, again, you had talked about how do we grow this. I think the key is really to have the executive sponsorship in place. So about 3 years ago, our CEO, Mark Benioff, he brought on a CEO, a Chief Equality Officer, to kind of focus on this initiative. And it was interesting. We actually had a meeting last week at our headquarters in San Francisco. It was an equality summit where we have 12 different ERGs within Salesforce. We all got together, and it's a very, very collaborative type of an effort there. So for instance, my role there is I'm a global growth chair for Faithforce. But I have a counterpart, for instance, we have a vet force, we have a bold force, we have a Latino force. So I interact with them to learn from them what are the best practices you're utilizing in your specific ERG. And again, it's really all about collaboration. And I think when we all come to the workplace, we come there, we have a daytime job, but at the same time, we have some values that are driving our behavior. And when you come to the office, you want to be who you are. And our Chief Equality Officer says, is there any reason you should not be able to bring your authentic self to the workplace? And he said, absolutely not. So again, if we have that executive sponsorship, it absolutely fans those flames.
Yes. Now, Craig, it's always intrigued me about Intel. Intel has been in the faith in the workplace kind of thing for many years. I remember Pat Gelsinger, who was your CIO for a long time, was a vocal Christian, and there was an environment of that. But you've evolved, I think. There's more of a willingness to be open and to communicate outside the company, which fans the flame for this. Can you speak to that a bit? What has changed?
Sure. It's been a journey for many years. Intel's had faith-based groups for about 25 years, a long time, and I've been involved for about 22 years within that. And along the way, more and more faith-based groups have come around, which is wonderful. But what's the most exciting thing, frankly, is, and a lot of the folks here in this room, is literally this fall, a lot of us got together. And so very, very recent, and we heard from Salesforce, frankly, inspiration for a lot of that. For us, it's like, wait a minute, we all do kind of things independently and this and that. What if we kind of all get together and get to know each other? And someone in the earlier panel had said is that, multiple times actually, it's not like we're trying to become this blob that everyone agrees the exact same thing. No, diversity is a good thing. We will agree on some things, and other things we will not agree. And that's okay. We can respect each other, we can do things together, and really bridge things. And that's got some attention from very senior people in our management chain, head of HR, lots of other people, a lot of executives. And how do you say no to something like that? So kind of going into a little bit of how do we multiply this? How do we make sure this goes forward? Reach out to your senior executives. Tell them what you're trying to do. I can't think of a company on the planet that doesn't want people to bring everyone to work. I mean, their whole selves to work. But how do you do that? And we need to navigate through this together. Lots of love, lots of care, and in developing the relationships. So when you bump into someone, you talk about it. You talk through why. Why are they concerned and things like that.
So what do you do when management is shy about this? I mean, they haven't necessarily jumped in, and maybe that's not the case. Maybe all your companies and are on fire about it, but what does a company do? What does a person do who believes this is real important, but he's not in, or she's not in the C-suite? Any ideas?
Quick second, I'll pass over. Do something about it. Don't be timid. Don't just sit there. We're in an environment today where human resources can be your best friend. I wondered about that for years. I was wrong. Reach out. Reach out to human resources. Reach out to the global diversity team, or whatever you call them at your company. They're there to help. It's amazing.
Yeah. I would just say, if your immediate manager, you reach out to them, they kind of, are not too warm to the idea. I say you keep going up the chain. That's right. You keep going up the chain, and if ideally you like to have it from the top down, then there is going to be movement, and there's going to be support, and there's going to be funding associated with that. The other way, a little bit more difficult way, just have to go from bottom up, and it can be a bit more challenging. But again, I think conferences like that we're having today will speak volumes as to the benefit, not just from a revenue perspective that the company focuses on, but just being able to bring yourself and be true to who you are when you're at the workplace. Again, it's interesting what you were sharing about having the mask. at the workplace, that's not a place anybody would want to be at. You want to be able, you want to be yourself. It reminds me when you're a young kid, your parents might ask you something and you maybe tell them a lie, and then they ask you something and you tell a lie to cover up that lie. And before you know it, you get confused in your own lies, right? So, it's really just to be yourself, be who you are, and I would say escalate. If they say no, you go further up, right? So that way at least you can say, hey, I've done everything I could, or you go cross-channel, you go up the HR chain,
Excellent. Excellent.
So, I've worked with a number of companies that have come across challenges, who are almost told like flat out no, but the one thing I think that really helps is to get someone who is in an executive role as a sponsor, or I like to say a godmother or godfather, to kind of help champion it through, and education. There's so much data out there about, other companies that have faith-based networks. Not necessarily a lot on the results side yet, but we're going to get there. But it shows, I guess, a little bit of competition, and it might appeal to an HR executive there. And also, too, when we're talking about diversity, it's diversity and inclusion. So they don't want to be seen, excluding faiths. We're not going to go there. It's like, well, wait a minute, that's kind of what we're all about, right? If we're talking about diversity and inclusion. And, so that, I think that's super important. And, there was one other thing I was going to share too, but it went right out of my head. Well, if I think, Gen Z. So this is an interesting data point that I came across recently. Most millennials identify with faith, about 28%, I think. And Gen Z, which is 2001 and later, who were the children after 9/11, or right at the time of, identify with faith at about 65%. So that's a huge jump. So now you're seeing siblings and parents of those individuals who are in the workforce, and they will be in the workforce very soon. So that's an interesting factor, I think, that's going to influence the growth of faith-based networks.
Well, looking to people who feel marginalized for their faith and asking them and challenging them, encouraging them to come out and explain their concern, their alienation. Is that a pathway?
One story that I was going to share that's both applicable to the last as well as this one is we have one person on our monthly call who moved from a company where there was a very strong ERG to faith-based ERG to a company where there wasn't, and he felt like he would just help make that happen but the answer was no, and he quickly became feeling marginalized.
Yes.
And but rather than just kind of give up, to your point, he has maintained his conversation. He's also maintained his relationship on our monthly call, and so we pray for that. He prays for that, and to the last question, even just our individual prayers toward this movement on God's call on each of our lives in different ways to see this move forward. I think that persistence, both personal as well as relational, can really help overcome that marginalization and just having those conversations.
Yeah. Excellent thoughts. I'm going to ask this question now, and then we'll open it up and get questions from you all. Question that I have, sort of the last one, who can help us in this movement, is the clergy. What concept, what ideas do you have? In some cases, I know in my circles, there's a sense sometimes that our clergy is behind the ball. They don't get it. This is not something that they have yet grasped. It's kind of hard to get their arms around it. Some of them get it big time and are really pushing. But I think of a guy like Mohammed Faris, who has an organization called Productive Muslim, and he talks about and he spreads the news of this is relevant. And he's not exactly clergy, but he's similar in a lot of ways in my mind. What can the clergy do to help move the ball?
I think one is looking for people in their congregations who are involved in these and giving that a voice. Our pastor and leadership team recently instituted something called This Time on Monday, and is a conversation about faith and work. And I think these employee groups can be a great example of this faith and work intersection.
Yeah, one of the things that I think that can be done, and again, as a Sikh American, before I even came to Salesforce, I've been in other companies where you might have felt a little bit marginalized, but that really didn't stop me from reaching out into the community because, especially since 9/11, there's been a lot of stereotypes. I guess anybody they would see with a turban or a beard, they would get, the anger that everybody had after that what took place, including myself, was just misdirected. So I felt it was very important for us as a Sikh American to be in the community and really be a fabric of the community. And so I'm a part of an organization called Loudon Bridges, and which, much like the name suggests, we get together with different faiths. And we actually had a series about a couple of years ago that we started. It was called Voices of Faith. And when we have a recurring series every week, somebody from the respective faith, be it a Muslim, Christian, Sikh, they would talk about their faith, and we would have tons and tons of folks that would show up. And as a result, we all got to learn more about each other. And at those conferences or those meetings that took place, there were some executives that would show up, so they would at least learn a little bit more about it. But from an educational perspective, I think that's key, because one of the things we focus on is just, we call really to inspiring by being around other people who have kind of the same mission to do good, right? And as a Sikh American, that concept we call is seva, which is selfless service. So I think that's really, really important, just to be a part of the community. And I think you can't give up. You can't give up.
Yeah. Excellent. Craig?
I guess one little thing to chime in on that too is figure out a way to be different. They might expect you, like for me, for example, me going and speaking at a women's conference. Whoa, unexpected, right? Me really going out of my way to help someone who's Sikh or Muslim. Well, I'm a Christian. Whoa. And no one can really say no to that. Because it's like, I am not serving my own personal interests. I am out there serving the interests of someone else. Wow. I mean, that just blows the mind of people. And I've seen it really change hearts in our senior management and things like that too.
Boy, I love that. And I also love the crossing over. And crossing over to people who you have fundamental disagreement with to stand up for their rights. If you ever see someone who's being discriminated against because of their faith or because of their LGBT proclivities or identity, stand up and support them. And when you do, it lights people's minds up and they realize this person's not against me. He doesn't hate me. He cares about me. He values me as a human being. I want to open it up to the audience. I want you all to tell us some of the things that you can do or that can be done to fan the flames. Yes, ma'am.
Actually, I have a question.
That's fine. Questions are good.
One is, are we still calling it D&I, diversity and inclusion, or are we moving from the D&I to DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion? That's my first question. Hold on to that. And then my second question is, who is owning the D&I efforts in your organization? Is it, I heard quality in some instances, I've heard HR in some instances, I've heard a D&I department in some instances, the chief diversity officer or vice president of diversity and inclusion. Who's owning it in your organization? So those two questions.
Okay.
D&I, DEI, and who owns it?
Yeah. Who would like to address that?
Within American Express, we've had a few models since I've been there for 15 years. And right now we have a diversity and inclusion area that sits under the Chief Diversity Officer. But she, the woman that's the head of the Chief Diversity Officer, she sits within HR. She reports up into the head of HR.
Yeah, I mean, at Salesforce, we have a Chief Quality Officer that all of the ERGs that we have set up, they basically report into our Chief Quality Officer. So it's really diversity, inclusivity, and equity as well.
I can't speak exactly to the first one. I'm not an HR, just in the business, and so I'm not trying to name change and things. But where does our global diversity, that's what it's called, it rolls up into HR. It's the HR group that's responsible for that and has been forever.
I want to suggest something radical in that in terms of ownership in the organization. Of course, there's a charter for different organizations. I'm going to suggest that the people in this room should take ownership in a very real sense, in being an advocate and being engaging the system. But I mean, I realize you had a different question about who owns, and that's a legitimate one. The question of equity, though, is part of the whole fabric, isn't it? It's part of the whole fabric of freedom. Part of the whole fabric of being cared about. Now, yes, Mark.
So I just wanted to speak to this point. The trend in diversity and inclusion is towards diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. So, and I also want to make the point, because I don't think it's actually been fully made in terms of histories of employee resource groups. These groups started representing communities that were not a part and not an equitable part of the corporations in which they were found. And they were not support groups, but they were ways in which to support the efforts of people to grow and develop in an environment that was not designed for them. That included Blacks, Latinos, Asians, women, people with disabilities. And so when we talk about it, I'm sure there are a number of models in your company where you don't just have an employee resource group, you may have a business resource group or some other model where the trend is not just toward how employees feel with one another, but how you are inherently adding to the business. So I wanted to say that because as we think about where faith-based employee resource groups are, and I think that we're going to actually have, in terms of how to keep the fan to fire, we're going to have to continue to work on language. Because faith at work works for now, for today, but it inherently may not include some people that we want to include. So I think that thinking about equity and accessibility, not whether you are physically able, but do you have access to the conversation? Those four pillars are areas that any faith at work or any other movement is going to have to address when we think about who's represented in our groups and who we stand for, regardless of whether there's a person of that tradition or not in your company. Those are the questions that are going to be before all faith-based employee resource groups as they continue their journey.
Excellent, thank you. Other ideas? Yes.
So, where can we find a list of companies that have such either ERGs or businesses? Because we have to talk to already, but where is the fuller list?
Brian, can you address?
Yeah, there's no exact full list out there. There are different lists. So the index we did identified about 43 or about 20 companies that have ERGs among the Fortune 100, top 100. We're continuing that analysis and we'll go through the Fortune 500. So we'll eventually be posting lists on all the companies. So they're right now it's just a hit or miss. There's some sites that cover some of the companies, but there's no exhaustive list.
So be networking and making those connections yourself. In the back, yes.
I'd like to address the clergy. Since I'm probably an hour here, but
let me give you a mic here.
Come down front.
The clergy issue is an ongoing challenge that's educational process.
I can't speak for all of my colleagues, but I would generalize and say that most are not comfortable in this setting. And it's not their own fault. To be honest with you, that's why you see more chaplains in this than you do parish priests or pastors. There's a difference. And part of it is the education process. And I think that exists in our seminary. I think that as this model continues to build and grow, and we continue to educate them, and part of my mission is to take this message into seminaries and to teach people of the opportunity that's in the faith place, the workplace at this time, in our faith-based groups, and to educate them and to give an opportunity to them to learn how to do that type of ministry, which is uniquely different than church or parish ministry. So it's an educational process that I think will be driven by these gatherings like this that continue to champion this effort, that they'll have to step into this. So yes, we continue to bring that forward.
And I think of you, Dean Aguila, and what you're doing in this institution to prepare people to enter this new world, really, of being transparent about faith. And it's very rich. Any further ideas about how to fan the flames, either in academia or in other spheres?
I don't have a lot of time because someone's requesting my presence. Okay. But I just wanted to, this is ideal for a large-scale image advertising campaign. And I'm just telling you, it's bring your faith to work and watch what happens. And again, I just think it should be, just television, radio, podcast, YouTube. I think it needs a massive campaign to get attention with lots of infrastructure to channel the responses. That's what I would do.
Great. Thank you so much. Yes.
So on the ERG topic, relative to BRGs versus ERGs, can the panel share ways they do that to add value to the company versus being a support group or anyone in the room?
I'll share an observation by working with multiple companies on this, is that whether they are called ERGs or BRGs, they all do have that business value proposition. It's more the name, and maybe with the BRGs a reinforcement of that, but I can tell you that the faith-based ERGs are very passionate about their business value proposition as well.
Also, too, I could add something to that. Although our employee networks are referred to as, employee networks, we don't even say employee resource groups yet. We're a little behind on that. But one of our goals each year that we're told to say, hey, how are you going to implement this, is with market segmentation, right? So the important thing is that we're working with the employees and making sure that we hire, retain, and develop great talent. But the next part is, what are we doing to help the business? So about, I would say, a little over 15 years ago, before I started at American Express, one of the large merchants that sells Christian material was not accepting the American Express card. And one of the SALT members said, hey, how come they don't accept American Express? So they went out to our merchant group, who works with merchant acquisition, and said, do they even know that you have faith-based networks at the company? And the salesperson that was working on the deal hadn't even told them that, or shared that with them. And as soon as they did, it showed them, wow, that's interesting. American Express cares about that for their employees. That's wonderful. And they said, yeah, and we do all these things within the community, and really spoke to their heart. And then turns out, said, oh, you guys are a nonprofit, we can give you a better discount rate. So it got the negotiations going back again, and it meant millions of more dollars of business. And it was just a matter of using the ERG for that purpose. So, we've got that mandate, although we're not called a BRG.
I know a lot of you have other ideas. I want to encourage you, the contacts that you've made the last couple of days here, please reach out to one another. the message is going out in many different ways, and there's an air war and a ground war, and the air war you read about and everybody blogs, and those are good, and I think that's wonderful. The ground war is important too. Take your personal experiences, feelings of liberation, and friends, people of other faiths who have just been so moved by a company that cares enough about them to listen to them and to know their heart, and share those stories and encourage others to share those stories. 1 million, 10 million, 1 billion people talking about what their faith has meant to them is going to change the world, not just change what's going on in our companies. And that's what we have for you in the topic of multiplying effect. Thank you so much for your participation.
Yeah, thank you. And I think I speak for all of us. We could have just kept going and going. So, Dina Bella, thank you for inviting us back. And I want to just finish with one short story. John Bishop is sitting over here. He doesn't know I'm going to call on him, but he and I had lunch a couple weeks ago, and then after lunch, we both live in Annapolis, and there was a package on my door, and he left some books. And one of them was a book called Heroic Leadership, from what company did he work for? No, the guy, the book, sorry, it was one of the... Chris Lonnie, what company?
He worked for JP Morgan.
JP Morgan, sorry. So he started off life preparing to be a priest, a Jesuit priest. And the Jesuits are the oldest, consistent, most successful company in the world. Now, the Pope is a Jesuit. So it's a religious order. So he gave me this book and I read it, and he just took these Jesuit principles and tried to look at, what is it applying. And the basic point in the book, one of them is that we're all leaders, and that's why the Jesuits have been so successful, that they've trained every person to be a heroic leader. Their motto is Magis, reaching for the higher. So, the story I wanted to end with was on 9/11. I was the academic coordinator in the Middle East for the West Point of the UAE. And on 9/11, I just dropped my daughter off in Dubai. I came back to Al Ain in the middle of the desert, right by Oman, where the academy was. And the events happened, and we had about 20,000 Afghani citizens living in the town. They had rioted a few years before, sort of in a rebellion. And I was supervising about 30 foreign teachers. We had some also British SAS instructors there. And after it happened, the brigadier general in charge of the UAE Military Academy, called the leadership team in, and discussing all these military terms I wasn't too familiar with, evacuation routes and rendezvous points, RVs, and Admiral would know all about this. And we were making this plan, and then the prayer call went off. And so it was time to pray. I was the only non-Muslim there. They invited me to join. And the brigadier general looked over. This guy had been serving us tea as we were talking, a sergeant. And the brigadier looked over to the sergeant and he said, "You're better at this. You lead the prayer." And so, all the officers and everybody lined up behind the sergeant, and he led the prayer. He was the leader. He was the leader. And last year, after Admiral Mullen retired a couple years ago, I guess now, as chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, I was sitting in Mass at the Naval Academy, and in front of me was a plebe, first-year midshipman, and right behind me was Admiral Mullen. So, again, right across that those faith communities, there's something that everybody, that's one thing faith does. It expects all of us to, take ownership, take leadership in our lives and share that with others. So we're leading in everything we do. So I just wanted to end with that, because that's been the theme we've been talking about, that we're, this movement will keep going if all of us are leading. And no matter what we're doing, whether it's with with my grandkids, or with your colleague, or with a conversation with the Uber driver as you go to the airport. All of these things are opportunities for leadership, and making a difference in the world. So that's what we've been doing here. We've all seen it, in different expressions, and I think that's one area again where faith is value added, because of these different dimensions that faith has that sort of puts in front. You can say in front of God, we're all naked, and so that it puts us on a level playing field and opens that leadership possibility within us all. So I just want to finish by, I can't express thanks enough for everyone, and I put the dean on the spot, and he responded, in seconds. It didn't even take, minutes. So.
If you get offered, I was going to demand that you come back.
Nice. Well, thank you everyone, and we'll be back here next year.
All right. San Francisco. Where are you at? Oh, you like drove here? I drove here. Ah, didn't fly or anything. Wonderful. Yeah. Appreciate it. An excellent course. Oh, I've got to get your contact. Do you have a card or something? I ran it.